party people. Welcome to
Hi,
the
everybody.
Transatlantic Call-In Show. This is the place where you get to call in and talk to two trans people about all of your questions for anything and everything trans related. So whether you are gender critical or an ally or a loved one with an uncomfortable question, we will take your questions today, here and now. I am your host, Katy Montgomerie. Just kidding, I'm Arden Hart, filling in for Katy Montgomerie. And with me today is the lovely Josie Caballero. How are you doing, Josie?
I'm doing well. How are you? I know it's you're great. You're a sub in, but I always love to host with you. It's always a
Oh, I know
good time.
I love hosting with you too, and I'm sure it'll be a great show. Yeah, I wasn't planning on being here,
Yeah.
so my hair is like not washed, and I'm in like just like a casual tee, but that's all right. We're still gonna have a good show. The lines are open. The number is 720-619-2288, or there's a web link in the description if you are from overseas and don't want to pay those nasty tolls. So definitely get those calls in, and we will get the show rolling. How's your week been, Josie? What's been going on with you?
Well, it's been a week. I've been catching up with work. I was in Philadelphia last week, so I've been really catching up on things as my voice is going out on me. Um, but yeah, it's been incredibly busy. As we know, I work in, the elections and voting world, and it's getting
Right.
hot and heavy. It's like every day some news is hitting, and some candidate is asking for help, and it's busy, but it's a good type of busy. It's like living as a professional trans person. I always say I'm professionally trans, as I
Right.
like to say.
Yeah, you're out there doing the real work, which also will kind of maybe tangentially at least relate to our poll for this week. Thinking of
Yes.
uh, elected officials who are running for office currently. But we have a previous week's poll to share with you. Also, we are planning a TACUS meeting in hopefully the next like month or so. But we may be shaking up the format a little bit. Maybe like moving polls. Jimmy and I were talking about maybe moving polls like later in the show or something, or just reading the poll out to you from the get go and then coming back to it later down this line.
Oh,
Um, just to kind of keep the flow of the show going at high pace, right into the calls. But we're gonna stick to the normal format until that gets like ironed out
yeah.
officially. Um,
Let's see what chat's really thinking. I like that idea.
yeah, right. So last week's poll with 10,000 votes reads: Do you believe transgender bathroom bans for children reflect sincere concerns about safety? 16% said yes, 84% said no. And I perused the comments earlier. Of the 16% who said yes, I think by far the most common comment that I read was that they believe the bans do in fact reflect a sincere concern of safety on part of the legislators, but that the legislators are just, in fact, ignorant to some massive extent where their concern is legit, but obviously the outcome is unenforceable or not really serving their concern. Um, but that's kind of part of why I asked it, because if you were sincerely concerned about kids' safety in bathrooms, I would think you would want to do something that is enforceable, that actually leads to some outcome that would improve safety, something demonstrable that we can see. And that's not the case with these bills. While obviously people can be ignorant, it just seemed to me to be kind of missing the point of the question, but the questions are always. I could never provide you all of the context in the question, even though people complain every week that the questions are not worded correctly and or to their satisfaction, or there's a lack of clarity to some degree. I couldn't give you all the clarity, but yeah, I'm curious to see what people think to that. Josie, what do you think?
Well, I think, there, we were talking about before the show, about that number being pretty high on the yes side of like 16%.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that is, this is what we hope, right? We hope that people are just like ignorant, and they're like, oh, they just really care about children, and it really shows like the power of like, please, will somebody please think of the children, right? And it really harkens back to like why we have seen the think of the children trope throughout history, from trying to keep them in child labor and like we want them to be strong hardworking Americans, give the children the chance to work, or having people, desegregation, slavery, like they're like it's always like please think of the poor children while we perform this heinous inhuman act upon the world. And the reason they use it is because it's effective, because people think, oh well, this
Mhm.
person really does care about children, so why would they have evil and bigotry in their heart when they're just using that as an excuse? Because if you actually look at the numbers, you'll see that when you assault children in bathrooms, regardless of what gender you are, it's illegal already, right? Like
Right.
it's already there. We already have measures to protect children and protect people in the bathrooms, because regardless if it's in a bathroom or not, assaulting somebody is just already demonstrably illegal, and it's a
Right.
horrible thing. And we also have the evidence of the fact that trans people do not perform more crime in bathrooms. In fact, they are more likely to be the victim of such crime in this type of case. So if they really cared about safety, they would think about actually putting these bathroom bans in place, actually increase acts of violence upon people if you count trans people in these type of polls, or in this type of
If you
data,
count trans
right?
people as people.
I know, right? It's like
Yeah.
we don't talk about the abuse of trans people because that would undermine our argument on safety,
Yeah.
right? Because the reason we're trying to protect these civil rights on people's access to public spaces is for the actual safety of society. But because they don't see trans people as people in a lot of cases, they don't see those numbers or those acts of violence as a thing to worry about. And as we've seen with calls that we've had on the show, from people saying, "Oh, but the few trans people that are harmed here and there is better for society." It's like, no, that's not okay. And
Right.
so I think overall, that people got it right. It's not a sincere concern, and it is just a old trope that has gone since the beginning of civilization.
Yeah. I think to your point of people being kind of swept up in the sincerity of people, there's a tendency, and it's a good one, I think, for the most part, at least as healthy in like interpersonal relationships, to assume that people are being honest when they're telling you how they're feeling about something. And it's something that people get criticized on this channel a lot for, when our host might pop off on a caller really fast and people in the chat might be going like, well, hey, we didn't even, I didn't get to see the display of insincerity yet. But the thing is, I think when you are in these circles for a long time, you've heard the arguments that are typically used to justify these sorts of things. You're able to suss out sincerity pretty quickly. Like, even sometimes in just how someone phrases a question can reveal to me a lot about how they're thinking about this, and their sincerity in addressing this issue. Um, and yeah, I think you're spot on that just most of the 16% that said yes to this, I think, are just completely convinced that when people say a certain thing, that they're probably sincerely representing their beliefs. Uh, I would argue that I think that's probably true of most constituents. I think a lot of the voters showing up probably haven't had the chance to think about it deeply, and so they probably do just buy into it completely. But the politicians who are advocating for these laws, they're using language that is very steeped in the propaganda around this issue, and so it seems very clear to me that they are approaching this from a political angle. In that, obviously it's political. They're advocating for laws. Political in that they are trying to appeal to their voter base, not necessarily to enact policies that they think are the best or the most effective or that would give people what they want. They think that this will appeal to a certain base to earn them votes, is how I read the situation.
Absolutely. It looks like there's somebody in the comments that's saying that you're quieter than I am.
Okay. Somebody say, yeah, I can see the levels are a little low. Maybe just turn
Yeah.
up the gain a little on this here. I can move a little closer as well. All
Okay.
right. Let's move on to next week's poll, though, or this week's poll, rather. This one's from Josie. Do you want to read this one? Kind of tell us your thoughts on it?
Sure. Yeah, so in the frantic text that I get an hour before the show from Arden, she was like, "I need a poll idea," and I was like, "All right, I'm in the middle of a meeting, so I'm thinking about this." So, do you trust Biden on trans issues? I think is a strong poll. It's a good idea to take a look at our community because I think and my thoughts on this is like a lot of times in our community we think of like, oh, people are upset in a political way about certain things, and I think it's a lot of vibes. Like, so let's check our vibes. Let's do a little bit of vibe check here. How do people actually feel about where our current administration is with trans issues, just generally? I think is an idea that I just thought about.
Yeah, no, I do like the idea, and I think I can kind of see justifying answering either way. So as far as I can tell, everything that Joe Biden has, every policy and like statement he's made on transgender issues seems to be clearly he's got a good team that's kind of informing him how to talk about these things, right? And that probably comes downstream from the work of people like you. But and while I would say I trust the things that he says like that, I also don't know that I'm really convinced that Joe Biden is sincerely compelled that trans rights issues are as important as they are, and rather similarly, honestly, to some of the lawmakers who are talking, but in just like an inverse way, is doing it more of a this is what's important to the people, and I am the elected representative of the people, therefore I'm going to push these issues regardless of how I feel on them. So I kind of feel like I could float in the middle on this. I probably come down on yes,
Yeah.
but I could see arguments both ways.
You're right, and I'm definitely gonna say yes most myself. But you know what? I'm now thinking that the question could have been framed better. Would have been, who do you trust more on trans issues, Biden or
Ooh,
Trump?
that definitely would
And
be interesting.
that would be, maybe I don't know if we could change it. It's too late. I'm pretty sure it's already up because it's already
Yeah.
up 3 seconds ago, as you could see. But maybe next week we ask the opposite way of saying it is, do you trust Trump on trans issues, and then compare the two, and
Yeah.
then maybe that will give people a more stark understanding of like what choices do we have to make here.
Right.
Is something to think about as well. But yeah, I mean, I think in the world of politics, everything moves so slow and things are very hard to see. Like for me, when I think of things, I think of like they just changed Title IX to add gender identity as one of the protected measures in Title IX. We saw, a proclamation for Trans Day of Visibility. We have seen the census data actually, as far as the ACS, which is the American Community Survey, now asking gender identity questions. Like there's a lot of things like passports have gender neutral markers now. That was
Yep.
under the administration as well. Like healthcare protection under the Affordable Care Act now includes gender identity as a reason to protect people. So there's a lot of things that happen, and I think that's the difficult part about this particular political administration is Biden's really bad about bragging about his accomplishments, while Trump is just the blowhard that is always going to talk about his accomplishments, even if they're not real or not.
Right.
And it's like, it's really frustrating because there's so much that is done, but it's really hard to like quantify them when the media doesn't talk about them ever. And it's really hard. That's why I think this question is great, because it's kind of like a vibe check, like and all those things that I just mentioned out of the few, like the military trans ban was reversed, like all of those things. I can just go down the list, and if the people are that have heard one of those pieces of information, then they'll be like, yeah, at least he's doing something, right? But like, it's like one of those things. It's like, do people know? And if people do see it, do they actually trust it? And what does trust actually mean? All right, so now I'm going way too philosophical.
Yeah, no, I think it's good though, and I am interested to see just a general vibe check from our audience, because I mean, like, we had Lux on a couple weeks ago, and I know that they don't particularly stan Biden. I think would be the
Right.
most gentle way to phrase it. I'm sure if it wants to come on and like really explain its position, we welcome Lux to do that. But
I'm ready.
so We do have a couple callers on the line. We also have a few open lines, so that number is 720-619-2288. Again, if you want to call in, please do. And at the end of the show, we will read all supers over $5. Let's jump into the first call, and then I can do some announcements after. How are you feeling about caller Matt? I think that's good. It's kind of a general question.
I think
All right.
I think we'll go with Matt.
All right, let's bring in Matt from South Carolina. Pronouns are he, him. Matt, you are live on the line. Talk to us. What's going on?
Hello, Arden. So, my name is Matt. I am, so, I guess you could say, so I have been invested in this. Wait, before I continue, is my audio okay?
It's actually...
It's a little crunchy.
Yeah, it's a little robotic. Are you using, like, headphones or something?
No, I'm on, like, my regular phone. I'm not on speaker. Sorry.
Okay. Well, we'll try it.
If we can handle it for now.
Yeah, if it gets too bad, I'll butt in and let you know.
Okay, thank you. So, I guess you could say for a while now, I have been a little interested in, like, the discussion of being transgender, because it's a topic that has a lot of stigma around it, and it's something that I've just wanted to try and get to the bottom to. So, I've kind of tried to, do my own research on it, and, I'm just wondering if any of you are familiar with this paper. Have you read What It Means to Be Gendered Me by Betsy Lou Cal?
I don't think I've read that specific paper, no.
Okay, yeah, so it was recommended to me by one of my teachers.
Hold on one second. It sounds like you've got
Hold on, Matt.
Sounds like you've got a rubber ducky or something. It's so weird.
Yeah, your audio is very crunchy.
Sorry.
Okay. It's okay.
I think we're in the clear. Try and get through the last bit of your question.
Yeah. Frozen in that position wherever you are.
Okay. So so I guess there's some and the thing is, like, I'm someone who, like, there are a lot of people who, when they say they don't understand it, they say it in a degrading way. When I say I don't, but, like, the thing is, I've said I don't understand it, like, I literally don't. Like, as in, I have never felt, I guess you'd say, uncomfortable in my skin in the way a transgender person has, if that makes sense. Like, I have never felt that I have been born in the wrong body, if that adds up. Like, it's just something I've never felt, so I don't really know how that feels. And, there are a lot of people who are transphobic who say, oh, I don't understand it, and they use it to just, like, be degrading about it. But, when I say I don't understand, I'm just saying I just don't know how someone who is transgender feels, because I have just never had the experience that they have.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense, and I think you are doing the right thing of, like, talking to real life trans people to try to figure this out, because I think that there's no way you're going to be able to read or do research on this to be able to figure out what the lived experience of another trans person is without actually asking them, right? And sometimes I like if you can think about it this way, it's like, you say you're he him, so you identify as a man, right, Matt? I'm guessing.
Yes, I am cisgendered.
Yeah, right. And the idea of the fact that you don't know what the lived experience of a woman is, but yet people still accept women. You accept women, cis men still accept women, cis women, and in that way. So think about how already in our lives we walk through the world not understanding other people's lived experiences and live harmoniously in society, be it be race, be it be gender, be it be like what sports teams we like, what foods we like, and all that. Is like, I don't like fresh tomatoes, but I don't hold it against somebody who does like fresh tomatoes, right? If they're like, in that way, because it doesn't make sense. So when you're thinking about the lived experience and understanding somebody else's like lived experience in a certain way, it's not necessary for people to respect. And I think we got there. I think that's where you were coming from originally. And I hear from you is you're trying to empathize with somebody else's experience. Is that correct?
Right. That would describe it, yes.
Okay.
Yes,
great.
I would say that describes it, yes.
Yeah, so I appreciate that and wanting to empathize with the position, and especially the idea that there's so much violence and hatred and legal boundaries and barriers that we have
Right.
as trans people living in the world. It's not fair and it's not okay.
Right.
So the understanding of what trans people are going through and living their lives as far as their identity, it's not right. So as far as, and I'll answer your question more directly now, and then I'll let Arden say something as well. But basically, for me as a trans woman, right, my lived
Mhm.
experience is that I feel more comfortable in myself in the presentation that I give as a feminine person. I
Mhm.
tried my best, and this is all my story, right? This is me.
Mhm.
I did my best to try to live as a cisgendered man for a long time. I was in the military. I got
Mhm.
really big and bulky and strong. I had a career in
Mhm.
politics before I transitioned, and I was still incredibly depressed. I was still not happy,
Mhm.
not satisfied with the dream every night of waking up and trying and being a woman, right? Like ever since I was 8 years old,
Right.
I was like, man, I think I'm a girl. Like I'm a girl. Like I want to be a girl, but I
Mhm.
still lived in that way. And then once I was able to take that step and say, this is who I am, I'm Josie, I'm going to be Josie, I was able to kind of like have a weight lifted off my shoulders in a way that's kind of hard to describe. And I think one analogy that I like to say to cis people is, if you think about, and it's been used a lot, I think Abigail Thorne also talked about this, about walking around, with a rock in your shoe, is how I like to say it. But
Right.
you walk to the world with a rock in your shoe, but you don't know you have a rock in your shoe,
Mhm.
right? But you walk around the world, it's
Mhm.
incredibly irritating and it hurts really bad, and you just don't know why. Every time you walk through the world, you have this rock in your shoe, and then you tell somebody, "Hey, by the way, like, man, when I walk, it hurts." And somebody's like, "Well, have you checked your shoes for a rock?" And you're like, "Wait, what?" And then you
Mhm.
take the rock out of your shoe and you didn't even know it was there, and then you put that shoe back on. Your life is fundamentally changed, right? Because you're like, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
I can actually walk without
Right.
pain. That's incredible. And that's
Mm.
how I feel about it when it comes to
Now,
my gender identity. Hmm.
I was gonna say, before Arden goes, so I just want to. So it sounds like what I'm getting from this is you attempted to live a lifestyle as a cisgendered masculine man
Hmm.
to, but regardless of doing that, you still felt strongly that you were a woman, and that feeling could not be shaken. If that makes, if that's proper wording, like it couldn't be, like it's right. That wasn't going to change,
Yeah,
and it ultimately was negatively affecting your emotional well-being. And once you
absolutely.
presented yourself
Simplistically.
more femininely and identified as a woman, that's when you saw improvements in terms of your depression and things like that.
Absolutely. And
Right.
and not everybody has to try to live as a man, right? In this case, it was just that
Mhm.
I transitioned at 34 years old, right? I'm a little bit older when
Oh,
I started my transition.
wow.
Yeah. And so, I had a whole naval career. I was a successful political person. I had a consulting
Mhm.
firm. I had all of the things, every measure or marker you could see in a human life. I had some measure of success, but I was still
Right.
miserable. And so,
Right.
yeah, so as simply as you said it, to boil it down, that's exactly how it is when I look at it now, reflecting back. But yes, Arden,
All
do you
right.
have anything to add?
I no, my experience is remarkably similar. I grew up around a very sort of toxic masculine culture and
Mhm.
felt compelled to really perform masculinity when I became aware of
Mhm.
when I became aware, oh wow, I'm really effeminate. People are calling me out on being effeminate, but I'm told I'm a boy. I gotta start shaping up and acting like a boy. And I tried really hard.
Mhm.
I don't know if you know my story, Matt. I've mentioned it on the show a few times. So I'm always hesitant to repeat, but
This is my first time calling in or actually
okay,
watching it. Well,
cool.
this is my first
So
time calling in.
quick primer. I came out to my parents when I was 14, told them I was trans. I started
Oh.
transitioning in high school. I got bullied really bad, had a terrible experience. And then around 17, decided if this is what being trans is like, it's not worth it for me. It's too hard. People are making my
Right.
life too miserable. I'm going to detransition. So I detransitioned. I moved to college, and I viewed it as I have a new slate. I'm at this new place with new people. I can try to just live my life as a normal man. And I sincerely tried. I joined a fraternity. I was really committed to the bit of trying to just live my life as a man and feel fulfilled in that. And no matter how hard I tried, I, like how Josie was articulating, just found myself miserable and so insecure constantly about the disparity between how people viewed me and how they treated me and how I felt about myself. And when I finally took time to reel back and say, okay, I think all of this is coming from my, relationship to gender and how much I hate that part of myself. And I started working on that and trying to work through that shame and that self-loathing. And as I did, I eventually realized this aspect of my gender was never going away. And no matter how hard I tried to sincerely be a man, this was just fundamentally a part of myself. We could debate on what ontologically is, a woman, if that appeals to you. But I think it's kind of silly. Like, at the end of the day, for me, living my life as a woman, coming out and saying, okay, I am in fact transgender. I'm going to look at the evidence. The evidence suggests people who've had this persistent sense of a gender that is separate from the one they were assigned at birth seems to suggest that I would benefit from transitioning. And so I sincerely committed to it as an adult. And I have never been happier in my life. Like, it's not like all of my problems go away, right? Like, I still deal with money. I still have episodes of depression and all of that good stuff. But at the end of the day...
But that's with anything.
Right, that's with anything. At the end of the day, I can sit here and be myself, and I can let people judge me. If people think awful things about me, or they think I'm weird, that doesn't weigh on me the way that it used to. And so, yeah, for me, knowing I was a different gender than the one I was assigned at birth was just purely on the weight of this lived experience of me trying to do what I was told was the expected and the normal, and I tried to have these like fulfilling long-term relationships with cis women that were heterosexual, and that wasn't me. It wasn't who I was. And accepting myself and following the evidence on trans people massively improved my life. Massively. Now I feel like whatever depressive episode I hit, whatever burden my life brings to me, I can handle it as myself now, and it won't completely shatter me. Yeah.
All right. So, in terms of all right. So, Arden, so what I'm getting from this is you grew up in an environment that emphasized heavily on masculinity, and when you say toxic masculinity, I assume you meet more or less what we would consider to be traditional norms for men, if that makes sense. Maybe taking those.
Taking those too far would probably be how I would articulate it.
I would say another thing is so you tried to you actually attempted to transition in you did start transitioning in high school, but because of the social stigma you got around that, you ultimately made the decision to try and stop, but ultimately it did nothing to benefit you in terms of your gender representation, how your gender representation related to your emotional well-being, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate.
And when you finally did transition and start accepting yourself, of course, this is with anything. I mean, like, I'm gay, and when I accepted being gay, that didn't mean all my problems automatically went away.
Right.
But when you finally accepted yourself for who you are, that ultimately did lift a heavy boulder off your shoulders and did give you more of an advantage in terms of your mental health and your well-being. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, spot on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So I guess a question I've had is, I just want to know if this fits an accurate description of gender to you. So one of the teachers, he's at my high school, he teach sociology, so I asked him ultimately, what is the difference between sex and gender? He said, so sex is biological. That's predetermined stuff. That's your chromosomes, all that. While gender is basically how your identity responds to your biology, if that makes sense. In the sense of like, or rather like it's more or less it's societally formed, and it ultimately relates to more traditions as in what society has viewed as being masculine and feminine and acceptable for those things. And he said that that a problem with gender representation can be on top of like just your identity that you feel with yourself. You also have the cultural and societal norms that are associated with gender, if that makes sense. Does that sound like an accurate description of what gender is?
So I would like to give it a little bit more texture. And you know,
Right.
you said I'm going to give it a little bit more texture. So you said
ahead.
you're gay, right? You said you were gay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So great. So if you think about I'm sure, have you ever heard of like the genderbread man or whatever? But there's like layers to the person. Sexual like sex, which is like what you said with like, you know, the chromosomes biologically. There is gender identity, there's gender expression, right, which is like how somebody presents, and then there is sexual orientation, right, and like, and all of those things are independent of each other. Now, do they correlate sometimes? Sure, that's where we get cis heteronormative culture from, right? And so if you think about gender itself, because like there are cis you know, people who present in a very feminine or masculine presentation, or no or neither presentation, but they're still cis because they identify with the gender or the sex and the gender alignment. So if you think about it in context, I think it will be a lot easier for you to like think about how somebody identifies as independence from their appearance, how they were born, what their sexual orientation is. And I think that will allow you to better grasp the whole thing. And I also want to say this too. We have been talking in a very binary way. This also applies to people who are non-binary as well, who don't identify with the masculine or feminine in the way society has presented those things as well. So it's all based on that. But Arden,
yeah, the only thing that I want to add to that is I think what you gave us, Matt, was probably a sufficient, like, really introductory kind of concepts of the distinctions between gender and sex. But I definitely want to push back on this kind of notion of biology as this sort of like predetermined thing, because in my view, sex is, well, we think of it as this like sort of state of being. Really, sex is describing a cluster of characteristics, like, you know, whether or not you have breasts, that's sex. Whether or not you have certain genitals, that's sex. Well, hold on, just let me get to the whole point.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. You're good. Whether or not you have breasts generally is as a matter of your sex. Whether or not you have certain genitals generally is a matter of your sex. Whether or not you have certain internal organs, reproductive organs, is a matter of sex. But a lot of those things are changeable. Your genitals are changeable. Your internal reproductive organs are changeable. Your secondary sex characteristics are all changeable. So I think it's important to point out that, well, sure, I would agree gender is probably could be surmised as like the way that, you know, your experience, your sort of subjective interpretation interacts with these sorts of you know, facts of reality with regard to your body and your biology. I think it's important not to view it as this sort of like deterministic thing that you are locked into a box, because, well, you can't change your chromosomes, and I don't really see even there could be some hypothetical future technology where that's possible, but it doesn't really make sense with everything we understand about biology right now. But everything else about your biology is like completely subject to change, and so I think it's all a little bit more fluid than we realize. But yeah, those are the only things I wanted to add on to that.
And Matt, and so, not to cut you off, we do have other callers, but I would love to hear what your final thoughts are on this.
Yeah.
Okay. One thing I do want to end with is when you talk about gender identity and presentation, I have kind of gotten that idea because, and this is why I mentioned what it means to be gendered me by Betsy Lou Cal, because she is a transgender woman, but she presents herself in more masculine way, if that makes sense. So she identifies as a woman, but her presentation is masculine, and that's why I kind of wanted to bring that up and maybe see if you or anyone else would be interested in maybe giving that a read and maybe giving your thoughts on that. It's an older paper, so it might be difficult to find, but But I was going to say, I feel like you have given me more understanding of what being transgender is like, and also the more or less the situation that trans people are in terms of how they feel. And I'm grateful that you both were willing to listen to my questions, and I'm happy that no escalation during this call.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you have more thoughts on it, Matt, and you want to dig deeper, please give us a call back. We would love to talk to you again.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I know
You're
that
great.
y'all get a lot of hate, so I was hoping that this wouldn't escalate because I know this show probably gets a lot of hate, but I'm just glad that you guys are willing to answer my questions. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Of course. All right, you too. Thank you. Bye.
And also, no, in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with getting angry or escalated. You can get angry inappropriately and maybe grief someone too hard when it's undeserved. Those are definitely things that can happen, but sometimes anger is justified. We're talking about very tense, dire circumstances a lot of the time, and so if things do get heated, it doesn't necessarily mean I hate you or I'm mad at you or I don't want you to call back. And if you get mad at me, that also doesn't necessarily mean that anything bad about you. I think these are all human emotions that are valid to experience. We kind of live in this like anti-anger culture in the US. And it's weird to me. Anger is a totally valid and useful emotion that we should definitely learn to harbor. Harness, maybe?
Harness.
Okay. Let me hit some announcements real quick before we move on to the next callers. I do see we've got plenty of callers on the line, which is great. Coming up this Sunday on the early Sunday show, we've got Seth Andrews and Forrest Valkai. That's at 2 p.m. Central Time. Sunday after dark will be Matt Dillahunty and Erika Gibbon together for the first time at 7 p.m. Central Time. Excuse me. That'll be really exciting. Definitely check that out. Skep Talk on Monday at 6 p.m. will be Forrest Valkai and Jesse Jurdak back again. Next week on Chewed Gum, I believe it's Alyssa Ljub and Erika Gibbon. We'll have to double check on that. I'm not sure that that's been officially confirmed yet. But also, if you missed last week's Chewed Gum that I was on, you should definitely go check it out. Our first call was insane, and Alyssa's amazing. It was so cool to work with her for the first time. I really loved hearing everything she had to say on like sex positivity. It's really awesome show.
That's really great.
Wednesday on the Hang Up will be Matt Dillahunty, and we'll be getting David Fitzgerald back again, this time with kinks worked out, so that way we can actually hear what he has to say. Next week is supposed to be me and Josie here back again, so we are carrying the show these days, Josie.
Yes, we are. I'm ready. I love it. It's just like, give me all the weight. I'll take it.
Yeah, me too. All right. Let's see. How are you feeling about Aron, caller 3? I think that one seems like that could be interesting.
Yeah. No, I think that would be great too.
Cool. Let's talk to Aron. Pronouns are he, him, and I believe our AR is Arkansas. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're live, Aron. What's going on?
Hey, nothing much. And yeah, it's Arkansas.
Okay, cool. What's going on? What do you want to talk about today?
Yeah, I guess non-binary folks is what I wanted to talk about. Kind of piggybacking off of the last caller.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it. What do you
generally, or do you have a specific question?
It's honestly it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So listening to y'all's story about your transitioning and how you want the outside to reflect the inside, I hope that's not a horrible butchering of the story. Yeah. But
fine.
So, but whenever it comes to non-binary people just wanting to change their pronouns, like, that to me doesn't make as much sense, and I hope I'm not sounding like an old boomer, but I really am just trying to call in and just learn a little bit more about the mindset behind why they want the different pronouns and why they want to be, I guess, non-binary.
Yeah. So I'm curious, Aron. I kind of want to do this in like a step or two. So when Josie and I were talking about our story, I think for both of us, it kind of sounded like we were reporting like a real difficulty accepting and fitting into the roles that we were given at birth. And that all checks out with you, right? That I'm like, it wasn't so much that I was like, coming out of the womb, putting on dresses, as much as it was like, I kind of like the girly stuff, but the male stuff is definitely not for me. Does that make sense to you when we talk about that?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So building on that, for me, I think non-binary people are just kind of taking that a step further a lot of the time, where a lot of non-binary people I know initially start out thinking that they're binary trans because they're like, their first thought was, if they're AFAB, for example, assigned female at birth, they go, well, I'm definitely not a woman. That feels wrong to me. And then as they kind of start making steps towards transitioning, they realize I kind of feel just as wrong being put into the box of male when I'm leaving that. And where I feel okay is when I'm just allowed to be me and whoever that is, regardless of where that box puts them. And for the people that non-binary people, I know, granted, this doesn't speak for all non-binary people. Non-binary is an umbrella that describes like a variety of different identities. The ones that I've had close personal relationships to, that has been an experience that they've articulated. It was basically knowing for sure that they weren't their birth gender. And then as they kind of started to move away from that, realizing that the other category wasn't for them either. And they felt just as dysphoric or just as bad in that place, and where they felt good like themselves. And that way to freedom that Josie and I both articulated was when they weren't being pressed to be either or. And so to me, that's kind of the best way I feel like I can break down non-binary identities from my position. But obviously neither Josie or I are non-binary. But Josie, you look like you wanna...
Yeah, I want to add something too, Aaron. There's also a spectrum of how people live their non-binary lives. Sometimes it's just pronouns, like you said, a name change. Sometimes cross-sex hormones are involved. Depending on how these people want to be. So, like, in fact, in a recent study that I just was able to help conduct, 92,000 folks that were trans or gender nonconforming, 10% of that non-binary population didn't even identify as trans. Right. So what we have to remember too is, like, when somebody says they're identity, right, and that includes being trans in particular, right, if a person identifies as trans, they're literally saying, I am not cis, right? Cis meaning, like, you were assigned male at birth, therefore you're a male. If you were assigned female at birth, you are a woman. Like, however that shows up for people. But for a person to say they are trans non-binary, trans woman, trans man, all of those self identities are really speaking to the point of, I'm not cis, right? And how that shows up for people are different on so many different spectrums, right? I know trans women that have had bottom surgery, like myself, and I know trans women who haven't. I know people who get top surgery, people who don't, but are still living in their identity that they choose. So there is no like, okay, you have to check all of these boxes to be trans. People are trans in the ways that they feel identifies with themselves. So I think I just wanted to mention that, because you said at the top of the call about non-binary people changing their pronouns, which is part of the non-binary experience, but there's so much more and so much more depth with how people choose that experience for themselves. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I mean, to the best of my ability, it makes sense. Like, I'm in the South, so there's not a whole lot of people that are in between here. I mean, it's a very divisive topic when it, in the Bible Belt where I'm at. So there's not a whole lot of in between people, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
And the best way to look at it is and Aaron, hold on one second. The best way to look at it isn't a in between. It's just a not or other, right? So it's like a person that doesn't really identify with woman, a person who doesn't really identify with man, and there's like really no in between to that. It's just that they don't categorize themselves as either, and wherever they fall in that is where they are as non-binary, right? It's like, let's say, so it's not linear, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I just wanted to just say that.
Yeah, and like, you can't put people in a box like that. Like, just because we have a label attached to us there's never a way to fully identify someone's whole being in a label.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Exactly.
I get that. I guess, do I have permission to say something ignorant?
Go for
in
it.
all
Sure.
kindness?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So I guess for me, like, growing up, there have always been tomboys, and that kind of, they have one gender, but obviously they come across more boyish, or the vice versa. And so I guess for me, it's just is like, well, why are we changing these labels for that specific scenario? I get where you're saying that there's some people that are in a transition or taking CRT and that kind of stuff. But, and maybe I'm just bringing up a hypothetical that's not actually the case. Maybe I've just been listening to too much Fox News. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's probably that situation. There's nothing that I or any trans person I know is advocating for that would in any way suggest that, like, tomboys or, like, butch lesbians are now non-binary. That's not the claim that's being made. It's more of that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's more of, like, you're evaluating your sense of self is what's going on, right? So, like, for example, I also think trans people on general are probably more atypical with their gender expression than cis people are. So, like, I think trans people are really trying to advocate for, like, a liberation of, the gender roles that we're imposing on people, where somebody can be a femboy, who maybe looks like a woman to everyone around them, but knows that they're a man, and that's just how they like to dress. And then there's some people who can be a trans woman who maybe feels a little bit more masculine in her presentation, but she still knows that she's a woman. We're getting a lot of car sounds on the side there. But yeah, I don't.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Nothing about as long as you're. I hope you're not driving. It sounds like you pulled over to me, but we try not to talk to people who are driving. But anyway, yeah, nothing I'm advocating for would advocate for, like, eliminating tomboy as a category or, like, femboy as a category. You can be whoever you want. Just don't oppress people based on that identity.
Yeah, and just to go on and say what we say, since you listened to the last call as well, about how there are the independent things about people's identity, sex, gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation, right? And I would even argue there's a fifth one, which was relationship configuration of having 0 to multiple partners. And so in reality, like, nobody wants to impose, and this is something that's very important about gender identity, right? If you understanding anything from this call, this is it. Gender identity is something that somebody imposes on themselves. Nobody can go up to somebody and say, your gender identity is this, right? So, for example, for a tomboy, right, if that person identifies as a woman but just dresses in a gender expression that is more masculine, that's who they are. They're a woman that has a masculine presentation, right? So when you think about that, the trans community as a whole, right, doesn't want to lose gender identity on anybody, right? So when the talking from, like, Fox News says, oh, this person's effeminate, so they must be a trans woman. No. We are not putting that on anybody. It is up to the person that is living that experience to identify who they are as themselves, because gender identity is something that you are able to express on your own as a person. And I think that's the most important thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and I hope you understand. I never want to be a dick to someone, and if they tell me,
oh, absolutely, you're great.
Pronoun, I would never
Yeah.
intentionally call someone by a different gender just to be me. It's more of just, I noticed in my body there's something that I have trouble fully accepting this branch, and so that's why I just wanted to call and get some more information about it.
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's hard. It's one of those things that's hard to understand if you don't, like, directly experience it. So this is what the show is for, Aaron. So definitely no worries, even if you said the wrong thing. Actually, I think earlier you meant to say HRT, but you said CRT. But, like,
no, I think you said TRT,
right.
like testosterone replacement therapy.
But, like,
yeah.
Yeah, it's not. I'm not worried about you saying the wrong thing or hurting my feelings. People try to hurt our feelings on the show. I'm immune to the things people say online.
Same.
But I appreciate you coming in here, even if you don't understand, or even if you might say things wrong. The sincerity of an interest to understand, and like trans people aren't going to magically go away, right? So like the sincerity to recognize that we live in a collective society. We all have to move forward together. Let's try to understand each other so we can do that as best as possible. Even if you don't necessarily fall online with me on every point. That's what I'm looking for from people on this show. People who sincerely want to build bridges and move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, no matter what, I
Aaron.
just want to accept people for who they are. Yeah.
Thanks, Aaron. That's awesome. We're going to take some next callers, but I appreciate you calling in.
Absolutely. You have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
So we have Jeremiah's been on hold for a while.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to take that call.
Yeah, let's take Jeremiah, and then I want to take. Oh, did they drop? Oh, there was a really spicy call that I wanted to get to.
Oh, did they drop? Oh, okay. Well, call back if you can still hear us. And
yeah,
we'll
I saw them
call.
in chat getting antagonized by mods. Justified, by the way, mods. Not trying to say you were antagonizing them unfairly. They were kind of being toxic. They called in at the mods' request, but they dropped. They didn't wait long enough.
Well, come on, person, call back. We'll pick up as soon as we're ready. Yeah, I missed that.
That's all right.
Arden, yes.
Well, let's talk to Jeremiah, and then we'll get to some more of the callers. So Jeremiah in Texas, pronouns are he, him. You are live on the line. Talk to us. What's going on?
Hi, nice to talk to both of you, Arden, Josie.
Likewise. What do you want to talk about today?
Well, before I get into that, Arden, I want to say that I actually had the opportunity to meet you when you were in Dallas for NARBC. I was the long-haired idiot eating hot wings with Aron Ra, if you remember.
Yeah, I remember you. Cool. Thanks for calling in.
You're welcome. So, just for a little bit of context, I recently had to start testosterone treatment as a cis man because I have very low testosterone count. And I noticed that it was incredibly easy for me to access that treatment. And, since I'm trying to educate myself about trans issues, and accessing that kind of treatment can be difficult for trans people, I'm noticing how hypocritical and unfair it is. And I'm wondering, how can I push back against these barriers as a cis person living in buttfuck middle of nowhere, Texas?
I think this is the perfect call for Josie. How to do political activism. Kill it.
Yes.
I figured it'd be a Josie call.
I think, yeah. Well, one of the things to think about here is, and I don't want to get too much into to the medical history of what it is, but did you have to go to an endocrinologist, or was this given to you by your general provider?
General provider. They sent a prescription in. I went and picked it up, and there was no barriers at all, and I see how inherently unfair that is.
So one of the things that I would do is talk to your general provider and ask them if they would do the same thing to a trans person, right? And, be polite about it and just be just a general inquiry, right? Because a lot of people in the medical community don't understand that you don't have to go to an endocrinologist to get your basic hormone replacement therapy. In fact, the endocrinology is a bottleneck that is actually manufactured by a lot of people who don't want to touch transitional healthcare and oh, I don't want to touch this. This is a specialist. I need a endocrinologist to do it, which actually a nurse practitioner in most states can actually provide this care as well. So when you're talking about this being able to advocate, being able to advocate with your own medical provider is one of those places, right? Where you're just hey, did you know this is one of those things? Do you provide this for a trans person? And if the answer is no, you can be why? Right. And try to get just an honest conversation about maybe figuring out, well, what are the rules in Texas? Why is that? Right. And maybe you can get them to think critically about well, maybe I don't know why. And then that starts a conversation with their other medical provider friends that are just hey, do you know that, this is considered gender affirming care? I just gave TRT to somebody, and it's one of those things that it's a cis man and all that type of stuff. And And so it's the idea of normalizing it, right? And how one of the things to think about this as well is how transition related healthcare helps all people, right? So for example, if they were to ban gender affirming care across the board, that could have affected you as a person that
Oh yeah.
need basic healthcare, right? So it's
Mhm.
like one of the things to really think about, especially with your other cis friends and other people that you know and trust that you share your medical history with, is being able to say, hey, our healthcare is under attack, like because they're going after trans people, like really bringing people into the fight of like this also affects your rights actually can generate activism and interest in communities that may not care about trans related healthcare. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, this can affect my healthcare. Well, now I care. Right. And sometimes people need to be brought in that personal level to be able to do it. But that's where I would start. And also if you really want to get into it, like talk and you could talk to your, state representative and be like, hey, I just want to educate you on the fact of after the conversation with your doctor, right? Like, hey, I just want to let you know, I just had a conversation with my doctor to getting this, really life-saving healthcare that I'm able to be able to get so I can live a better life. That this is under attack because of the ways that these laws are being written in the state. Can we make sure that doesn't happen and make sure that we protect healthcare for all people? And those type of things could also be helpful too by going to state hearings, sending a message to your representative can also be very effective and just say, hey, I'm happy with my healthcare. Don't change things. Right.
Okay. Yeah. I never would have thought to talk to
Arden,
my
I can't hear
practitioner
you.
about it. So, yeah.
My bad, I was muted.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think Jeremiah, you bring up like a really interesting kind of conundrum, which is that clearly, these laws that are being passed to restrict access to trans healthcare are not so much about the care itself or their concerns about its legitimacy. It's who is getting it, which, if that is not patently discrimination based on your group identity, I don't know what is, because what you're showing is it was no problem for a cis person to access the same exact care that a trans person would be getting, but just for a different purpose, right? Yeah, it is. I don't really have anything to add onto what Josie said as far as like practical things that you could do from your position.
Mhm.
Just kind of an observation of like what your situation elucidates, and I think it could be could put you in the position to conduct some really effective like activism on like you don't need to be out on the streets if you don't want to. Obviously that kind of thing helps, but you could really move some people with that perspective, I think, in showing them that when cis men need this care, when anyone else needs this care, it is readily accessible, but when trans people need this care, it's being restricted. Why?
Yep.
Yeah, that's
Well, thank you so
definitely
much for
something
your
to
call.
consider. No
Yeah,
problem. I'm
this was a
sorry I
great
couldn't be
fast
spicy
call.
because
No, it's fine.
Spicy
I
Arden has
prefer
all the zingers. So,
Oh, yes, absolutely. No, but thank you for making the call. And it's also very educational because we hear
Mhm.
about it all the time that, cis people have access to this healthcare that trans people need as well. And, you're just another piece of anecdotal evidence that people can say. It's like, hey, cis guys can get testosterone care, cis women can get estrogen care. Like, why are we blocking it for people who just need the care that they can get if they were cis, right? So, no, thank you for
exactly.
your time. Yeah.
All right, one last thing, unrelated.
Yeah.
Arden,
Mhm.
as a snake enjoyer, I think you should petition your snake fairy to deliver a noodle friend.
Yeah, I think my snake fairy is about to actually do a show with Seth Andrews. Maybe I probably shouldn't even be saying that. It might be like a secret. But yes, if he becomes available and is listening and he wants to deliver a snake, that would be wonderful. But thanks for calling
All
in,
right.
Jeremiah. I appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll run into you again soon.
If you're ever in Dallas at the same time I am, I tend to go meet with Aron every time. So,
Right on.
Awesome.
Have
right.
a wonderful day, Jeremiah. I'll talk
Have
to
a
you
good
later.
day.
Bye.
Talk to you later. Bye.
So I did close the lines because we have 3 more calls and it's at 3:00 and
I have
it's
time
close.
if you want
I'm
to take
gonna
an
open
extra
a
one.
line because Godseed, the caller who dropped, who had mind you, whose pronouns were serial killer at first.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Is complaining in
Open a
chat that we
line for
wouldn't
that
take
person.
him. But
Well, all right, we'll give him 5 seconds. Let's go. 10
right.
seconds.
So leaving a line
Just
open
for you.
for Godseed to call in on. But until Godseed gets screened and put in, we're gonna take
That's
another
fair.
caller. So let's talk to
We'll take you, Godseed. Don't worry. Just
Matt
wait up.
in the UK. Pronouns none given. So Matt wants to talk about pronouns and the impact they have. And I think this could be a really interesting call. Hopefully it's productive. Matt, you are live. What's going on?
Well, thank you both. I will try and make it productive. I listen to the Atheist Experience a lot, and I always bang my head against the table when somebody asks questions that we've all heard 1,000 times, and I fear I'm going to be that person.
You sound honest from the get-go, so I've got high hopes. What's going on?
I'll do my best. So, on the Atheist Experience, people, the question is, what do you believe and why? Mm-hmm. And when somebody says, I believe in God, they kind of say which God, and they get a good definition just as a kind of working thing. So when somebody says they identify as a man, say, what is the definition of man? Because I can't get my head around how you can identify something that doesn't have a definition. So what's the definition that you're identifying to? Is that a fair question?
Sure. So I want to just say that I don't think that there's no definition. I'm comfortable with a lot of the normative definitions that people give. Like, you'll hear typically said in the sort of gender critical world, for lack of a better term, they'll say adult human female. I think potentially adult female human might be like a better definition of woman. But the reason I'm comfortable using that is because when we talk about any definition for any sort of social category like this, they're always permeable, and it's just kind of set theory where most sets are going to fail to include everything that people would put in that category, and they're going to fail to exclude everything that ought to be out. So, like, for example, when we ask someone, like, what is a mom? A lot of people are going to talk about, like, oh, this is the, person who gestated you in their womb, right? They carried you to term and they gave birth to you. But obviously we know that moms can be adopted, and you can have stepmoms, and you can kind of have like a social mom, just a woman in your life who took care of you. That can be effectively your mom. So I don't really object to the definitions of like adult female human or adult male human, just as long as we recognize that those definitions are necessarily going to exclude people who we both would probably agree are cisgender and would normally be included, and they're going to necessarily include people who don't typically fit into those definitions, including trans people.
So is your pronoun adopted? Is it one you adopt, or is it one that aligns to some sort of physiology?
I would like to talk about this. So one of the things that we have to think about is the fact that a lot of, and this is no, I'm not trying to put any offense to you, but a lot of cis people do this, Matt, where they're like, people's genders are their pronouns, right? And the thing is, people's gender isn't their pronouns. It's just how we express ourselves in the language that helps as a shortcut to give people's identities, right? So in a lot of times when I say, hi, I'm Josie, my pronouns are she, her, people can assume, oh, she probably is a woman and self-identifies as a woman because of that shortcut in that wording. So I try to not try to wrap myself so much around the pronouns, other than it's kind of like a part of how you identify as your name. So for example, I self say my name is Josie, right? Nobody's going to challenge me and say, is your name Josie? It's like, yes, my name is Josie because I said and declared my name is Josie. It's very similar to the she, her and it's basically a thing that we use in language. So and does that answer your question? I would love you to respond to that if you think about that.
Well, it doesn't only in that. Yeah, I've been assigned the name Matt, but that doesn't link to anything in the real world. It is just a label. You can't make any assumptions about me based on my given Christian name.
Sure. Well, you could
sure.
people.
For
People
the sake
can
of
make an
argument, that's fine.
assumption for the sake of argument, right? Like, there's like names that are inherently masculine or androgynous or feminine and things like that. But essentially, like, if you were maybe is your actual name Matthew?
Yeah, my birth name. Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah,
you chose Matt. Yeah, you shortened it because for you it feels better to say Matt, and people will call you Matt, right? It's so for you it's just like you giving an outward expression through language that helps feels better for yourself, and that's how I feel about pronouns. Right? Because if somebody was like, if you were to be like, no, my name is Matt, and they're like, okay, Matthew, sure, Matthew, you'd be like, hey, why are you not calling me by my? It's very similar to how pronouns are, right? Because at a point it becomes harassment, right?
Well, not really. I mean, I wouldn't be able to march if somebody called me Matthew.
Right.
Well, I think, but the difference is when we're talking about trans people in relation to pronouns, people intentionally misgendering you as an attempt to be like hurtful or to, out you to strangers. I think that's where Josie's kind of saying like the intentional misuse of your stated preference can amount to harassment.
Yeah, exactly. If somebody called you Nancy instead.
No, sure, but that's fine. But I wouldn't flag. Yeah, I mean, if somebody called me Nancy, I wouldn't flag it as a hate crime.
Sure.
Well, what if they kept doing it though?
Yeah, I was gonna say
somebody you work with.
Exactly.
Somebody you work with.
Well, I mean, they'd absolutely be a douchebag, but it wouldn't be a hate crime.
Well, right, but okay, hold on, wait, I want to jump in. What if when it comes to someone called you Nancy every time, and you're like, well, yeah, it'd be annoying, maybe they'd be a jerk, but it wouldn't be a hate crime. Okay, but what if there was a long history of people named Matthew being called Nancy, and being called Nancy was a way of taunting you and virtually threatening that they intend to commit some sort of violence against you. And while maybe that violence has diminished in frequency over the generations, there's still sort of a heavy-weighted connotation. And now they're calling you Nancy every day at work in front of your coworkers, maybe in front of customers if you're like in like service or something. All of a sudden, Nancy stops being just a annoying kind of like trolly jerk thing and becomes actually a risk to your safety and well-being.
Right. But I haven't seen that. I haven't seen people doing that for names.
Sure, but we can directly observe this happening to trans people for pronouns.
Yeah. So Matt, the reason I'm drawing a comparison through the name thing is because pronouns are something that you announce that is part of you, right? Just like your name, Matt, is part of you. That is who you have outwardly stated. You'd put it on a name tag. Like all of that is still a part of who and how you express yourself as a person in the world, right? So when somebody decides to completely disregard that to a point of disrespect, then it's just like, why are you doing that other than just to be hateful and mean? Right now, we can get into the semantics and definitions of hate crime and abuse and harassment and all of that type of stuff. But in reality, it is about somebody completely disrespecting the thing that you asked them politely to do. Right. And so that's why I always say that pronouns aren't necessarily linked to gender, because pronouns aren't your gender. The gender is what I express. I am a transgender woman. I am a woman. Right. That is how I am as far as my identity. I choose she, her because it makes me feel better, and it's something that I decide to put on. I put on the pronouns of she, her, like I put on this feminine blouse, right? Because it's something that I am telling the world and society around me, this is how I want to be seen in this space and in this place. It's just pronouns are like the language representation of a blouse. Does that make sense?
Right.
Because if I decided to wear a blouse, right, and somebody was like, you need to put on a t-shirt and pants, that to me is just as hateful as calling me he, him, right? Because you're literally trying to change something about me without my consent. Does that make sense?
What is the difference between, it does, what is the difference between identifying something and being something?
Well, I don't think there is much of a difference, right? Because if
so why do people say I identify?
Arden,
so why do you say I am? Sorry. What's your pronoun?
So I think there is.
I'm she, her.
There is a difference between someone being something and someone identifying in something, in purely that context as stated, because you're talking about like the difference between like something being hypothetically the case and something being like actually the case, right? But when it comes to gender, the only access you have to someone's gender is their self-report. Just like the only access you have to someone's favorite color, whether or not they're depressed, how they feel about like a certain TV show is through their self-report. Necessarily, the only way you have access to someone's gender identity is through their self-report. And so when you're saying like, is there a difference between identifying as something and actually being something, what it sounds like you're trying to say, and maybe this is a mischaracterization, so please correct me if it is that you're trying to suggest, is there a difference between a cis woman who is a woman using she, her, and okay.
No, I wasn't. No, sorry, I was trying to say, if two words mean the same thing, why do we have two words? That's all the point I was making.
Sorry, I got distracted before you got into this, so I don't think I followed that thread. What is the two different definitions of the same word that you're articulating?
So I think you said I've lost the thread now. So so you can identify as a gender, but you can't identify as a sex. That's a question, not a statement.
So this is complicated. I don't necessarily think you can identify as a sex, but I don't think we kind of talked about it earlier. I don't know if you heard. I don't subscribe to the notion that sex is a like category that you are either in or not in. I think when we're talking about sex, we are talking about a collection of traits that are displayed on someone's body. And so and now I've kind of lost the thread of where I was going with that.
This is an exceptionally difficult topic to navigate, partly because it's inherently difficult, and obviously nobody wants to offend anybody, so that's also difficult.
Well, Matt, I think this also describes the difficulty about gender, and this is why we should just, like, when people tell you who they are, believe them, right? Where it's like the idea is, somebody says, "Hey, I'm a woman. Hey, I'm a man. Hey, I'm a non-binary person." Like, there's really at that point.
But I don't know if that means sex or gender.
Well, it doesn't matter.
It does if it's physiology, and it doesn't if it's just a label like Matt.
So why do you think it matters if it's physiology? Help me understand what you think matters there.
Because I care about language. When somebody says I'm a woman, it's only respectful to understand what it is they mean by that. And if there isn't a definition, I don't know what they mean. And if it doesn't have a meaning, I don't see how you identify against this lack of definition.
So Matt, I have a question for you. I want to, if we're going to go radically to language, right? If somebody says, "Hey, I'm a woman," like outside of patting their genitals down in this particular case, which would be a physical sexual assault, like I don't understand the difference. Like if you are sitting with somebody who's a cashier at a register, right, and she's like, she's sitting there checking you out at the grocery store. And then she's like, "Hi, I'm Samantha. Oh, it's been a tough day today. There's so many people." And in the conversation, she identifies she's a woman. You wouldn't be like, "Well, how can I be sure you're a woman?" Right? Like that to me is like a very radical approach.
But I could be wrong. I mean,
What do you mean?
This is an awful analogy, so forgive it. But can I identify as black?
No, because that's a completely different argument.
But it's not, is it? Surely it's arguing against a physical. It's identifying as having a particular physical characteristic.
But the difference is that race is external and heritable, whereas gender is purely a internal assessment of your sense of self.
Yeah.
No, sure, but that's why that's why I couldn't work out if sex and gender were completely different. If there's a link, then the language matters, doesn't it?
So I've only learned this word recently through Katy, but I would say they're not orthogonal. Like, they're not unrelated entirely, but I would say they are. Well, there's a relationship between them, and they obviously influence each other. Just looking at like normative statistics, most people are cisgender. They aren't one and the same, is how I would articulate that.
Yeah, right. And it's not always the case, right? Like it's just like most of the time doesn't mean all of the time. And for the exceptions of the cases, like Arden and I myself, who are both trans women who are both assigned male at birth and when they were born, like that our sexual characteristics is completely irrelevant to our identity as women. Does that make sense? It's relevant to us being trans, but it's irrelevant to our women. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, I mean, so I was given the sex of male at birth.
Sure.
Can I identify as a woman?
If that's your gender identity, yes.
Yeah, I don't understand what that language means anymore.
So identity, yeah, I get that you're trying to, and I appreciate your looking into this. So going back to this has come up almost in every call, so it's great. About the things that make up a human. There's sexual orientation, there's gender expression, there's gender identity, there's sex, and then I argue as well as relationship configuration of people having 0 to multiple partners. Now, all of those things can be related to each other, or they can be completely independent of each other, right? And every one of those things. So, for example, let's say use the example of a tomboy, right? A person who identifies as a woman, right? Somebody who identifies as a woman, somebody who has the sex assigned at birth as female, but they have a masculine presentation, they still identify as a woman, right? So their identity, their gender identity is something that you assign yourself, that you internally feel, and the expression is something you outwardly express, be it on the feminine masculine spectrum, and that includes pronouns, by the way, is part of your expression. Those are the things that are also independent of each other. So you, as a cisgendered man, somebody who was assigned male at birth and identifies with man, you don't have to have the extra step of thinking, am I a man? No, you just are the way you feel in your mind. That's the way the world has been presented to you. That's how you feel comfortable. While somebody else, like myself, who was born, assigned male at birth, I had to be like, wait, this doesn't actually, this isn't congruent. My gender identity is woman, so therefore I am a woman. And then the gender expression of my femininity came after that. Does that make sense?
It's getting. I'm struggling the difference, and I'm thinking back to the atheist experience. The difference between a belief and a fact. If somebody says, "I believe God exists," are they saying that's a fact?
I would not say them saying "I believe it" is a fact.
So if somebody says,
that's an external.
Is gender a belief or a fact?
No, gender
is a fact by virtue of saying it.
It's a fact because it depends on yourself.
Yes,
it's your internal analysis.
Just like if I tell you my favorite flavor of ice cream is vanilla, that is a fact by me saying it. I am telling you a fact about my internal sense of self. Of course, I could be lying, and of course, you don't have access to my brain, so a certain amount of suspicion is reasonable. But at the end of the day, you not taking my word on my favorite ice cream makes you just seem like paranoid, right? And I would say the same thing applies to gender in that way. Gender is a fact.
So it's opinion like ice cream.
Well, whether an opinion is vanilla is better than chocolate. Me telling you my favorite flavor of ice cream is vanilla, that is a fact.
Yeah. There you go.
Yes, it's a fact about your opinion.
No.
Well,
I guess, sure, but it's still a fact about the truth of Arden's truth of like vanilla.
Right, it's a fact about my sense of self. Of like when I've tried all the different ice creams, this one is the one that is my favorite. It is a fact.
Sure, and nobody's arguing about your
ice
favorite
cream exists.
I don't ice cream shame. It's fine. You're wrong.
Yeah.
It's rum and raisin. So gender has no impact on the external world because external worlds are externally validated.
Well, it doesn't have it doesn't have impact. It has a very significant impact to the person themselves. How they express themselves has an impact on the world around you, living in the via of the social construct.
Right, but if you're trying to say there's no physical test for gender, correct. You can't take a blood test and go, there's this element in your blood that we see is at a certain level that's sufficient to determine you have this gender identity. No. That is not a thing.
But you could do a blood test for sex.
You could do a blood test for certain elements of sex, sure, like someone's chromosomes.
But for example, like if you were to take a blood sample from myself and a cis woman, a blood sample alone could not determine the difference between if I was trans or not. For example,
I think you can.
You would have to have DNA sample.
I don't know about.
You would have to have DNA, but you can't do it from blood. You would have to have a DNA, which is different than a blood.
I guess I don't know enough about forensics, but can you not get DNA from somebody's blood?
No. If it's just blood.
Really? Because haven't we put... Anyway, sorry, that's kind of
besides
the point.
Anyway, sorry, I don't know. Yeah. Besides the point. Anyway,
rabbit
sorry, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Right. So it's a fact about a belief. I think that's where we were getting to.
But the thing is, like, a belief in God is an external thing, right? Like you can't internally prove the existence of a God by your own personal belief. What we're talking about, though, is I can't prove that Arden's favorite ice cream isn't vanilla. What was that?
No, I agree. Sex is external, but gender is... Sex is saying there is a God and here he is. And gender is saying, I feel God in my heart.
No, see, so here's the difference. No. When somebody's saying, I feel God in my heart, right? They're making a claim that God exists in reality, and the only access I have to him is this feeling that I have in my heart. Whereas when I'm saying I have a gender identity, that is not making a claim about, I think this is kind of to your point, that is not making a claim about some like ontological reality like, there is a gendered mystical box, like metaphysical box that I am in, right? That is just telling you my self-report of this this facet of the human experience that we call gender identity.
Yeah. So gender is and stop if I'm only sorry. It's really hard to on the call, as you know, to not interrupt people.
Yeah, I know. So, I just want to say that let's try to wrap this up, and you can call in next week. I think Arden and I are both going to be on here next week as well, and maybe we can have a further fleshed out conversation because we are approaching the end of our time and we have just a few more callers. So I don't want to cut you off. I really enjoy this conversation. I just want to make sure that there's time for the other callers as well.
No, 100%. So close it off. So gender is purely internal.
Identity, gender identity, yes. Well, purely internal, yes.
And people, but that identity doesn't have a definition.
No, I wouldn't say it doesn't have a definition. I think it's fair to say that point out that it's a little bit nebulous, but only in as much as any internal assessment of our sense of self is nebulous. Like depression, like people try to say it's a chemical imbalance in the brain, but that's been debunked. Like depression really is just your self-report of your sense of self.
Yeah, you could argue pain is a self-report.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's a great thing. But Matt, I really appreciated your call. I would love to continue this conversation as well.
Yeah, I kind of want to get into it deeper. I just want to reiterate, Matt, I appreciate you calling and talking about this specifically because there's another caller who has been hostile to our screeners that is sitting in the queue right now who wants to talk about the same thing as you. But you've been very respectful, even though we don't agree. And so I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I don't mean to cut you off So please call next week. I want to get deeper into this conversation. If we start where we left off today, I think we're going to get to some really good stuff.
I will do my best. I hope the next caller isn't as hostile as you think.
Likewise. Okay. Have a nice day, Matt.
Yes.
All right. Take care.
All right.
Sorry, Arden. I didn't want to cut him off too much. It was just that I know for the sake of this person being that we're not going to take their call, I want to make sure we take that call. Yes. And I think Matt's heart was in the right place. I want to make sure that
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to take this call and might have to use liberal use of we'll see how it goes. Drop. We'll see how it goes. All right. Godseed, you have made it live. Hello.
If I seem a little hostile, I'm sorry. I just don't like being jacked around. Anyway, my question is, how do I know this isn't some kind of faith-based system? How can I falsify this? Like, from your position, like, if someone's like, hey, how is it, this gender non-binary stuff, it's all bullshit. How do I prove to them it's not bullshit? And from here, I want to let you have the floor and not say anything else.
Cool. I appreciate that, Godseed.
Thank you, Godseed.
Yeah, so kind of similar to we were talking about the last caller. We're talking about gender identity. We're purely talking about someone's internal assessment of their sense of self. So in as much as you could falsify that my actual favorite flavor of ice cream isn't really vanilla, maybe you could find some evidence that I'm lying. Maybe that while I say my favorite flavor is ice cream is vanilla, every time I've gone to the ice cream store for the past 3 years, I have in fact bought chocolate. Now, would that be absolute confirmation that I was lying, or maybe that I just was on a chocolate kick? No, but I think it would be at least some evidence to support your case that I may in fact be lying.
Yeah, and when we're talking about the idea of this is more than faith, is I will always go back to the literature of the fact that every medical institution in the country, psychiatric institution, every pediatric psychiatric institution and medical institution have all observed and have been able to write educatedly on the existence of trans people, their lives, as well as the needs for life-saving gender-affirming healthcare. And we have so much evidence to show that trans people actually have a higher satisfaction of life when given access to gender-affirming care, as well as acceptance in society. So there is just a preponderance of evidence of how we've been able to exist. We've also existed throughout history as well. And there's just nothing out there to disprove the fact that me and Arden are sitting here in front of you talking to you right now as legitimate trans women that are trans. Does that answer your question?
A little. And actually, to tell you the truth, it still sounds a bit like faith to me. Maybe not like what Matt was saying, faith in God per se, but I could tell you that I'm a progenitor from the planet Viltrax, and by your logic, you just kind of have to take my word on it.
Well, I think the your trust in someone's say-so is going to match the claim that they're making, right? So, if somebody tells me, I'm sure if you've watched the other atheist shows, Godseed, I'm sure you've heard this argument before. If someone tells me they got a dog, I'm probably just going to take their word for it because I know that people get dogs. I know that dogs exist. Maybe I know this person has said they want a dog before. But if someone comes up to me and hold on. If someone comes up to me and says, hold on. Okay. If someone comes up to me and says, I just got an invisible purple fire-breathing dragon and it's roasting all of the fruit off the trees in my backyard, well, I'm going to be a little bit more suspect of that claim, right? And likewise, I think if somebody says they are a given gender, you have every right to be suspicious about how honest they are, but it depends on the proportionality of the claim, right? If they say that their gender is whatever alien planet you referenced, maybe there's more reason to be suspicious. But if the person just says that they are a gender, probably not that serious, probably more likely to be true. But of course, they could be lying about their gender. If you see someone on the bus and they say they're a teacher, they could be lying about that. But I don't really have any reason to go investigate, or nor do I particularly care whether or not they're lying about their profession, unless like there's some other external factor that might make this lie more important.
Okay. Actually, maybe I asked the wrong question there. Maybe the right question here is, how is this different than a claim of being Napoleon or Jesus Christ?
Well, because we have the
Or even a prophet of
observable.
God.
Sure. So we have like when I'm going back to like the medical literature of it all, we have a deep understanding of insistent, persistent, and insistent cases of gender identity and understanding of how that works, right? Like when you say that I am a prophet, that doesn't actually speak to any of the things that we have in the social construct of what gender is, right? And so, for example, like I feel like when you say you're a woman while I say I'm a prophet, the conversation kind of becomes I don't want to say bad faith, but it becomes very not it's not congruent anymore, right? Because I think it's more along the lines of what Arden said of saying, hey, I'm a teacher, that's my profession, and the person goes, well, I'm a prophet of God, like, to me it's like it doesn't seem like a good faith type of discussion at that point, because if somebody is saying those type of things, then maybe that person needs does that make sense? It's not congruent in the conversation.
Hold on. I think what you're trying to say is reason why it's not congruent is unlike a claim of being like a prophet or a messiah or whatever, you're not trying, as to claiming a gender, you're not necessarily trying to claim a position of authority and therefore exert power over other people. Is that about right?
Well, I guess in the context,
difference?
I think in the context of what you're trying to say is like they're completely different things, right? When somebody says, "Hey, I'm a woman," and then like outwardly expresses that or however they want to present in that way, it doesn't actually make a claim on anything like, hey, I am a prophet, so therefore listen to me and bow down to me. Is like it's not comparable in any frame of reference at all, because there are cis women, there are trans women, there are trans men, there are non-binary people, like all of those things actually exist.
Okay. So again, the vast difference from the claims of being a prophet, and that's how you can say, yeah, that's crazy, or, you shouldn't really take people who claim to be prophets and stuff seriously. And I agree, you really shouldn't, because usually these people are very toxic. But anywho, as to just people who's like, hey, I know I was like assigned or born as this gender or sex, but I believe in my brain and everything has led me to come to the conclusion that I'm actually the opposite gender or no gender or somewhere in between at all. Is that I'm sorry. I hope I'm grasping the difference, right?
No, I think you're doing great. Yeah, continue that line of thought.
Yeah.
Continue that line of thought, because that's exactly right.
Because my only problem with this whole thing is, how do I just separate this from any other faith claimer and also be able to, support this without, prescribe, what's the word I'm looking for here? Appealing to faith or something like that. Like, hey,
so
here's some hard
facts. Let me frame it.
You definitely don't need to appeal to faith for someone's gender. Unless you're using, in this case, faith to be synonymous with trust, which some people like to conflate those two definitions, which it makes it way more complicated. But I think you're using faith. I think you're using faith in this situation as the biblical definition of trust in things unseen, right?
Oh, okay. So, you know what? Maybe that has been my error this whole time.
That could be.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah.
Godseed, I
And-
want to give you
and I-
credit. Actually, I kind of was wondering if we could maybe put a cap on this call, because this has actually been a million times more
Well,
productive
thank
than
you.
I was
This is
anticipating. And I actually,
Same here.
I want to
Same
leave
here.
this on a good note. So maybe we could wrap
Yeah.
this up
Me
and you could
too,
give some last
actually,
thoughts.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Same here. And in fact, thank you, because maybe that I knew there was something I was missing, and maybe you've given me the last key I need. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
this
much
is
for
great.
calling in, Godseed. I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to let you go now, but you have a wonderful day, and we will talk to
Yeah.
you
Have
later,
a wonderful
Godseed.
day, Godspeed.
Bye.
You too. Bye.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little perplexed because I saw the messages in chat, but that was like weirdly productive and good.
That was incredibly productive and good. Like, and honestly, if I had another moment with Godseed, I would have also said, like, think about it in the other direction of like how society just assumes people are men and people assumes people are women, and that's not a faith claim either. It's the fact that people just like live as a man live as a woman because they were assigned that at birth, and there's like the people on that side don't have to prove the negative, right? They don't have to prove that they're men or prove that they're women, but trans people have to prove it, right? And that isn't a fair burden on trans people to have to prove their gender while other people don't.
Yeah, it's like a really common thing because we talk about, the most reliable pathway to someone's lived experience is their self-report. People think like that means kind of like what Godseed was saying, where it's like, oh, so you're saying, or not what Godseed ended on, because he ended on a really good note, where he kind of started from was saying like, oh, you're telling me I just have to trust what you're saying, like wholesale. And it's like, no, you don't have to trust anything. Just like you don't have to trust when the lady on the bus tells you she's a teacher, and you don't have to trust when this guy down the road says his name is Bob. But at a certain point, exerting excessive doubt about mundane claims that people are making starts to make people question about like your mental states, rather than revealing like it's not like you're being skeptical at that point. You are being paranoid, right? That everyone is lying to you all the time, which is
if
silly.
everybody lived that way, society couldn't function.
Yeah, I think the analogies of like sort of ice cream or careers or all of these things that are internal self-report that you just have to give to someone are really effective, because I think they help show people that these claims are very similar in nature. All right, we've got 2 callers left on the line. Let's take them both and wrap up the show.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's do it.
Up next, we have Levi, pronouns are he, him, in Colorado, has a question about being friends with someone who might be a TERF. So this could be really interesting. Levi, you are live on the line. What's going on? Tell us in your words.
Oh, I hope you both are having a lovely day. I was just wondering, how do I trust that even if another person that I'm a friend with is like, all nice to me and everything like that, but they have shitty beliefs like TERF. Like, she doesn't like totally identify as a TERF, but she says she doesn't mind to be called that for whatever reason. And I don't remember all the details, but she's one of those people that believe that trans women shouldn't be in sports. And I tried explaining to her that, well, there are trans women that lose to cis women all the time, but she's like, that's not the point. The point is it loses the dignity of the sport. And just like, I don't even know what that means. So I just don't want to be led down a bad path because I'm not always able to articulate what I'm thinking when it comes to arguments or debate. And like sometimes I'll explain myself really well, and other times I'm just like, like I'm like, broken computer.
Been there.
So is it worth holding a friend that is willing to identify themselves as a TERF?
I love this question. If I could jump in first, So I don't think there's anything wrong in and of itself with being friends with someone who has bad views. And the reason I say that is because that can be the most effective tool at moving people out of those bad views, right? Now that said, before chat, crucifies me over here, I think you absolutely have to do an internal assessment of what is it worth for you? How close are you to this person? Is this relationship really important to you? Maybe more important than being aligned on views. In that case, I think absolutely stay friends with her, work on the relationship, maybe try to appeal to her more. Also, you don't have to debate. If you don't feel like you're a person who debating issues is your strong suit, you don't have to. Just be her friend and be a friend who has the different opinion, so that she is exposed to that and she thinks that that different opinion is like somewhat normal. But also, I think there is, in my view, at least I feel this way, like there is a little bit of an obligation when people hold harmful views to challenge them on it in the areas where you're comfortable, in the times where it's appropriate. But I don't know. I some of y'all might know Zelf on the Shelf. Jimmy used to do collabs with them. They just did a hour-long video sitting down with one of the sisters from Girl Defined, and how she and her husband are deconstructing, and how, while she might have certain views on LGBTQ people, she doesn't want people to be devoid of rights and to be harmed or bullied or harassed and things like that. And I was like, this is really beautiful that these two atheist people, well, actually, I don't know if that they're atheists, but that they can sit down and have a conversation with someone who maybe has some bad views, but looks like they're kind of working them out. That can be such a good influence to move people in the positive direction. But also, I don't want anyone to feel like they're obligated to be friends with people who have bad views to fix them. That's definitely not a good approach to have. But Josie, do you have other thoughts?
Yeah.
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 Go ahead, Levy, if you want to say something.
My name's Levi. Sorry.
Levi. Sorry, I apologize.
Yeah.
I'm bad with names. I'm the worst.
And sometimes, I don't know if Arden, if you remember the last time I called on the show, but I expressed my own issues that I have with trans people on an internal level, and I just don't want that issue to be added up. Somebody says something transphobic, and the part of me that needs to stay quiet just goes, she has a point. I'm kind of afraid of that, and I'm trying to be better and a better trans ally and everything like that.
So Levi, first, I think that this friend of yours should call in at some point. You can always have them come in, and we can definitely have this conversation as well. But I always talk about it this way. You and Arden kind of spoke to this about, you already have a relationship with this person, you already have a friendship with this person, so therefore you probably already have an idea of what makes this person click. Right, a tick, right? And you're just like, okay, I know the values of my friend, or at least I think I do. The turf thing probably is a little bit suspicious, but I always think about values, right? Because the statement of my friend doesn't believe trans women should be in sports is very blanket, but it might not be as blanket as that person actually thinks. So, for example, I always think about the fact, and I say this a lot on the show, and I'll say it again because it's very important, is the idea of the value of participation in sports, right? The value of somebody participating in sports and the positive aspects to their mental health, their physical health, their social ability, and just the psychology of just being able to just get your exercise in with friends, and to really be able to participate and be in that space is incredibly important. And I think most people in the United States can agree that, in the world, can agree that there's a lot of positives to being able to participate in sports. So if you start from that value of don't you think people should have the chance to play in sports? A lot of people will say yes, right? And then from there, you can start working your way in and being like, well, there isn't any domination happening in sports. Every major women's sports organization in the country are like, hey, there is a way for trans women, trans girls to participate in sports, especially young trans people, like elementary, even in high school. It's so important to their developmental health to be able to participate in team sports and play with their friends, right? So when you start talking about that, you may get to like the edge cases, right? Where it's like, oh, but Leah Thomas, or oh, but this one person. And then at that point, you're like saying, so are you trying to say that all of these people are not supposed to participate in sports because of a few edge cases? Could we say the same thing about Michael Phelps? Could we say the same thing about somebody who's maybe a cisgendered woman who is like 7 foot tall and can play basketball? What, is there a height limit now? Like, you know, when you start getting to the edge cases, the argument starts to unravel itself. So if you stick with like the general people, like most people in society should be able to participate in sports, most people will start to identify in that. But if they start saying, well, I don't think trans women should do it at all, they shouldn't participate in sports, make sure they call in first off. But second, making sure that you're like, well, then I thought we agreed on the value that people should participate in sports, right? And so I would start from that, because it's easier to start from there than to start at the edge case and work your way backwards. Start yourself with the general population and work your way forward. That's how I generally would look at this conversation, if that makes any sense on a messaging standpoint.
Yeah. She also says that if in women's spaces, if there's some women that are nervous about non-passing trans women coming into their spaces and it triggers them because of a past sexual trauma. I don't know how much I can say without getting in trouble with YouTube or whatever.
Sure.
But she says because of that they should leave, or they should leave women's spaces if it triggers like women, like if they're in a bathroom and they're not passing enough and they trigger a woman from past negative experiences with men, then they have a right to be heard or something like that. And I'm like, well, maybe, but why do we have to kick out trans women or have trans women get the short end of the stick? They've had their own traumas and stuff too. I don't know.
These are that's the exact same argument that was used to encourage like racial segregation, right? Like people would be like, oh, I perceive, you know, a black woman as being dangerous. Therefore, I think it's important that we maintain these segregations for our safety, even though it's just a perceived sense of danger, right? You're not actually talking about, as she articulated, it's not an actual demonstrated risk of harm. We're talking about perceived harm based on trauma. Nobody else is obligated to diminish their quality of life because you have personal trauma. Like that is just an absolutely ridiculous and entitled perspective to have, that other people should put themselves at more risk, you know, maybe go to the male bathroom or hold their pee and get a urinary infection because they had to hold it until they got home. Trans people are at increased risks of UI, by the way, because they do that. Just because somebody else has a perceived sense of danger with them. That's a completely unrealistic expectation to have.
Yeah, and also, like, think about if you were to apply that outside of spaces as well. Could you imagine if you were sitting in a restaurant one day and you were just, like, sitting there eating your food, minding your own business, and somebody's like, that person over there says you look like somebody that physically abused her, so we're going to ask you to leave. Right? Like it's not applicable to real life and society of trying to live into the standard of the fragility of other people to try to design the world around that, right? And we also have the fact that trans people are more likely to be abused, so they're more likely to need those type of spaces so they can feel comfortable in their own selves as well. So the idea of, oh, this person might be nervous, so let's exclude an entire group of people, is again being completely absurd. And if we were to apply those rules to everything else, and Arden already talked about segregation being one of the number one things that where we've seen that in history.
Okay.
Have her call in.
Yeah. If she has the time, that is. Hopefully she does. I don't know. But,
next week we're here.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry my voice is a little hoarse, but
You're fine.
Oh, it's fine.
thank you for and stuff like that. And it's always nice to call in and everything to have these discussions because I have hardly anybody to talk to that's pro-trans or progressive at all on these issues. So
Yeah, that's what this
Absolutely.
show's for. So thanks for calling in, Levi. I appreciate it. And
Thank you,
keep doing the work. You're doing great. I appreciate talking to you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
all right.
Bye.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
You too.
All right, we've got one caller left on the line, and then we are going to be moving on to super chats. Any super chat of $5 or more, we will read out live on air. So if you guys want to make us say all sorts of silly things, now is your chance. It's never been easier. All right.
I know.
Last caller of the day is Seth in Canada. Pronouns are he, him. Seth wants to talk about, well, Seth, why don't you get into it? Tell us what's going on.
Well, hi. I've noticed just kind of from the sidelines of these issues that sometimes there's a tendency to take on battles that maybe shouldn't be fought or fought the way that they're being fought, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you have some examples?
Yes. So we'll go with the trans women in sports since it's all over the place and relevant to the previous call. It seems to me that the naysayers are using the concern of disadvantage as their main point. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the pro side is using as their main point the civil rights issue of women are women, whether they're trans or cis, and therefore they should be in the women's sports. Is that correct?
I would reject that characterization of my argument. This is the difficulty when people come in with something like, trans people are arguing this poorly on this issue. And it's like, okay, you can find a trans person who says almost anything. So I'm not going to say no trans person says that. But that is not what any mainstream activist that I know would articulate their position as on a defense of trans women in sports.
Yeah, my position on that is about participation and inclusion, access, equal access to being able to have, participation in sports so they could have the same rights and dignity as any other person in society. That's where I would actually lay my argument on.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think mine is probably more of a negative in the not like negative vibe, but like more that I reject the notion that there's ever an appropriate reason to ban an entire group of people unilaterally from any like aspect of society. Like it's almost always necessarily going to rely on arguments that don't apply to everyone in the group and that apply to some people not in the group.
Okay. This is good actually because it's exactly what I'm talking about. So now what I'm seeing is what I've heard there is completely not in the direction of what I'm hearing from the other side. So that means that both sides are talking past each other.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. Sorry, go on. I don't mean to interrupt you.
That's okay. I think what you've told me makes sense on a societal, this is how things should be. It's good for participation and it's good for, I'm sorry, Josie, what was your point?
So
I
my
have short-term memory issues.
No, it's fine. So my point was about participation and having people have equal access to something that is beneficial for their, health, well-being, societal development, and all of that. And Arden's argument was also very similar of the idea of what the argument that Arden was making. I'm going to try to steal man you real quick, Arden, if you don't mind. Was that we shouldn't be discriminating against people based on a characteristic,
right?
and just whole
and a
cloth
whole group of
discrimination.
people just
Exactly.
right.
Yep.
Okay. So those both make sense. But but here's the thing. I'm not hearing any argument against that from anybody who's saying no.
Yes. So this is the problem, and this is part of why this show exists, because all of the people who are making law, well, I shouldn't say all, almost every single lawmaker that I've heard who's making laws that are intended to ban trans women's participation in sports, it's always trans women too. It's very rarely, they'll have a blanket ban on trans people, but they always talk about trans women. They're talking about trans women, men have this biological advantage in sports, and they want to destroy women's sports, and it's going to destroy the integrity of the sport, and that's what they want. And it's dishonest, and it's propaganda, and that's the problem. We are living in a time where trans issues are the core of a propaganda machine for the Christian nationalist movement, the right-wing conservative movement in the U.S. And I see you're in Canada. I think it's kind of trickling its way up there, but maybe not quite as fast, hopefully.
I could tell you some things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's trickling fast.
But
yes.
Okay, so here's my thing. From what I'm hearing from the naysayers, there's definitely a lot of that in there, in that deep, ugly core, right? But the numbers they're getting is because there are people who legitimately, in their view, think, these huge males who think they're women are going to come in and dominate these sports, as you say they're saying. That doesn't have to be the case in order to fulfill what I've heard from you two, right?
No,
because
Sorry, go on.
Because what I've heard is there shouldn't be an entire group of people who are banned from playing sports just because of who they are, which makes sense. And, oh man, my memory. What was the other one?
Participation access.
The importance of access.
Yeah, that they can play sports. It's fun to do. They should be able to do it. Why not? These goals don't seem to be in conflict to me. One of them is going unaddressed, and it is, to me, the naysayers. Your points are good, but it just doesn't talk to their point.
So I guess yeah.
Go ahead, Josie.
Yeah. So I hear what you're saying, and it's trying to pull us, like I was talking about the edge case, right? And they're trying to point at very minor things and say, oh, there's an advantage here, there's an advantage here, so we got to prevent this domination of sports. But in reality, when we look at like the way society is lined up, policy and all of that type of stuff, when you're actually, and this is the problem with a lot of politics and policy in general, is you actually speak to the real issue and the real problem. And when you have a side that is trying to manufacture an issue, it's really hard to speak to a manufactured issue that really doesn't exist. So that's why when Arden and I talk about the reasons why trans people should be able to participate in sports, we don't start on their false ground that this issue exists. So, for example, not one single trans person has ever won an NCAA scholarship. It will happen eventually, but it's not happening at the rate that they're talking about now. And there has been an Olympic athlete that was able to get into the Olympics, but they didn't even make it past the qualifying round to actually compete for a medal. Like you have like Leah Thomas even, who won one race in one heat of an entire swim match, but wasn't even close to breaking the actual physical record of a cis woman who set that record a long time ago.
Then lost a competition weeks later.
Exactly. There was a trans woman that just recently won a 200-meter race, 400-meter run race, won by like a 0.16th of a second. and then lost in the 200, but yet they talk about her winning the first place and dominating the sport when she barely won the first place medal and she lost in the second race, which was a 200, right? So why, and that is the biggest problem that we have as people, especially myself, who actually legislates and lobbies and works on trying to get these policies passed. It's really hard for me to start on false ground because it legitimizes their argument that there is a problem in the first place. When I start my argument, when I legislate and talk about policy and lobby, I'm talking about the reality. And the reality is their false claims are causing massive discrimination and causing the ability of actual trans people to participate in sports, which is hurting the mental health of the people that are in their states, that are actually causing people to self-harm, right? So these one edge case that they're trying to do is actually trying to stop a lot of people from participating in sports. And when they see those laws, statistically, the people who see those laws affecting them are more likely to be depressed and lead themselves to self-harm. And so that's why I start at that argument. That's also why Arden starts at that argument, because blanket discrimination is much worse for society than trying to make up an edge case and argue against that. Does that make sense, Steph?
Yeah, I want to jump in before, Steph, you respond, because the only thing I want to re-articulate from what Josie said is exactly. Just because my argument for trans inclusion doesn't address their argument doesn't mean I don't have refutations to their arguments. If you came in and said, hey, I heard argument X, Y, and Z against trans inclusion in sports, I'd be happy to address it. Mm-hmm. But you came in and were asking about what our position on trans women in sports is. So I would say my position on sports is what I told you, but I do have refutations to their arguments and I'm happy to present them. But to me, logically speaking, those are different arguments.
They are. But my point is that I'm not looking for argumentation here. I've heard the arguments. What I'm looking for is a different avenue to a solution than what is being attempted. Because I think it was Josie who said that you were working in the legislative realm.
Yes, I do. I work in political and legislative policy making. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the civil rights angle is good. I agree with everything that you've said. My concern is that that's not going to work on the unreasonable people. My idea.
Sorry, go ahead. I would like to hear it.
Yeah, my idea is, I understand why you don't start with their false premises. But what if you started with the false premises and then just swept the rug from under them by changing the rules entirely?
So
this is actually.
This feels to me a little bit like you just kind of entering the sphere and not really knowing what work has been done or what work is being done. Because people literally in the chat were groaning, not because of anything you said necessarily, but they were like, oh my God, another trans sports call. Are you kidding me? Because we talk about trans sports on this show every week, sometimes multiple times.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Because we talk about trans inclusion in sports every week on this show, almost. Somebody calls in about it all the time. So our audience has heard both Josie and I articulate our arguments against the arguments hundreds of times, and I continue to do it, and I will continue to do it. But sorry, Josie,
which is why I don't want the argument.
Seth, so thank you, because you're bringing up a pretty good question. Right, because this is a conversation about messaging strategy and why certain large trans-led organizations, people who work in the space and do policy, start at this angle that I'm starting out. Because when you're talking about messaging to people in the middle, right? When you're talking about the movable middle, and I talk about that very specifically because
not the middle.
Well, so give me 1 second here. Yep. More people live in the middle in the persuasion space to get people to move to one side or the other. So in politics, a lot of times it's easier to move the people in the middle and overwhelm the people who are against you because you were able to move the middle people to your side and beat them in a vote, an election, killing a policy. And we've been very successful at that. In fact, out of the 500 bills that were passed, that were attempted recently, I think it was like less than 6% actually even made it close to getting into law. So we're actually crushing the opposition overwhelmingly across the board. Now, the
I
issue
agree. I can
here
see that.
is, yeah, right. So when you're talking about like trying to sway somebody who is like persuaded by the edge case of Leah Thomas or like all of these type of things, if we start there, you're giving them the ground to continue to argue that point. And then the people that are in the space that are unsure about that situation is going to be like, well, it sounds like it is unfair because they keep talking about this fairness debate over and over and over again. So maybe this jury's still out, right? So if you start on the ground that you are winning, right, you're more able to actually win legislative wins in that particular case. We're never going to be able to stop the edge case argument because there's always going to be a right-wing nut job that is going to be like, well, actually, there's a winner over here. And like the thing is, like we're always going to be confronted by that, but the best thing we can do is not give that argument oxygen, right? And smothering it with not even giving it the time of day. Does that make sense? And I know it's a really heady conversation. It's a really heady argument because we're talking about messaging and persuasion of like legislative policy, and that can get really, really.
But I'm not talking about those things.
Okay, so what are you talking about?
I'm not talking about those things. I'm talking about the actual structure of sports.
Okay.
The thing that they do, as you said, is they always focus on the trans women. Because they don't care about the trans men. They don't see it as a problem, as a threat. But the problem to me doesn't seem to be I don't take this the wrong way, but it doesn't seem to be a trans issue at heart. It seems to be a social issue blanketly in that there's the categories of men's sports and women's sports when it should be ability bracket.
Okay.
Not this ancient social separation of men and women. And the ones that are saying, well, the abilities are going to give them an advantage will be solved, and the ones that want to be in their gender groups will be able to have their own little men's and women's, but the professional ones, the ones that people are screaming about, will be based on ability, and that's all anybody should be caring about in those cases.
So, I have a lot of thoughts. I don't necessarily disagree with you that I think that would be a superior way to structure sports. I advocate for sport structures that aim for maximum inclusiveness and maximum fairness simultaneously. Whatever it takes to get both of those things. Some people are going to necessarily be excluded from some categories of sports. Some of them will be trans, some will be cis. As long as it is aiming for maximum inclusiveness and maximum fairness, I think those are probably going to be the best policies. And what it takes to meet those criteria is going to be different for absolutely every sport. The problem is, and the reason I think Josie and I take such a legislative activist angle is because laws are being passed that are saying, if you were assigned male at birth, you don't get to compete in these sports. And while I totally agree with you that I think sports leagues should just say, fine, then we're just abolishing those sports or those structures and we're just doing this. That's not what we're seeing, and at least not fast enough. Like there are people who are, unfortunately, it sounds terrible to say, but there are like young people who are essentially the sacrificial goat, who are going to be the ones who exist at a time where these laws are passed, their opportunities are revoked, and they are already graduated out of these systems by the time the issue is fixed, right? And so I think the reason that Josie and I take this legislative angle is because what forces people to, and some people balk at the like, oh no, the government forcing people to acknowledge human rights. This is what moved people on the matter of race and civil liberties, was passing federal legislation that said you cannot discriminate against people on the basis of race. They have standing to sue you if you do that. those are the kinds of things that move society quickly away from engaging in. Now, obviously, there are still systemic racist issues that we all can acknowledge and see. But these are the kinds of steps that fix these issues. Like, I would love it if it could be kind of like an anarchist, like, oh, but what if everyone just did the right thing, man? Like, that would be great, but people don't just do the right thing, so we have to pass laws.
Yeah, and I just want to also mention as well, I'm speaking from my expertise as a person who works in these spaces in this way. I work with several consultants that actually work in the spaces that you're talking about as well. We have people who are advocating for regulations and policies within the NCAA. We have people who are working with regulatory bodies. We have activists that are working in the IOC. We have trans people and activists at all levels. We have a lot of athletes that actually perform at the top levels of competition, actually help regulating these sports as well. So this is one slice of the pie, Seth. And I think that is something that I think you can take away from this conversation, is that this is an all court press. Here's the sports analogy coming. But moving forward in this actual understanding of how we're actually working together on this issue. But this isn't just like political people making this move. This is athletes. These are spectators. These are people who love the sport, love the game, love regulations. We have medical professionals doing studies and science and understanding bodies better in all these different realms. Like, there's still so much that we are learning as a human society in all of these aspects. So, like, if you leaving this call, just know that there is a lot of work being done in the space to make sports more inclusive and fair, like Arden is talking about. It's just not my expertise set. But I know that there's a lot of trans people and people who love us that are working on this stuff as well.
Well, it's good to hear that. I haven't seen much of it because I have worked in sports, and it seems like there's fighting that there shouldn't be.
I hear you.
On both sides. Like, from both perspectives, it doesn't make sense to me.
I hear you. Although I will say, this show has been around for 3 years, and I've been doing trans activism for longer than this show has existed. These conversations and these fights are being had, and you're just maybe not seeing them. And that's in part because I think trans people are such a minority in the general population. You know, I think in the US, we're like less than 1% of the general population, which is still millions of people. But as a matter of frequency, we just don't appear that often. So a lot of sports leagues aren't actually having to contend with this issue yet because they don't have a trans participant. But these conversations and these battles are absolutely being had, and on the grounds Josie and I are talking about.
Yeah, the AOC just released a study just recently talking about how trans women actually have a disadvantage in sports, right? Like, so there is work being done, and but I do appreciate you staying vigilant. Make sure that whatever sports regulatory body that you're working with, that they're taking these arguments in consideration and bringing somebody who has lived experience in it.
Yeah, well, the ones that I'm working with definitely are trans allied, or at least friendly. They've been taking steps for that, but it's just progress in the civil rights category, which is good, but not in the social atmosphere that I'm seeing.
Sure,
it takes time.
Yeah, that's going to be a much slower slog. That's just always going to be a slower slog. Moving society on their values as a whole is just a massive generational product. So
look at gay marriage 20 years ago. Gay marriage 20 years ago societally versus now, that took 20 years to get to where we are.
Well,
so
it's funny you bring that up. Before I go, just quickly, so you know where I'm kind of coming from on my mindset, that the whole gay marriage thing was big when I was a kid, and I'm bisexual myself, so it was more of a dog in that fight than the trans issue. But to me, it was always, as an atheist, why do I need to get married in a church? What's wrong with
that's
the civil
another
union?
conversation
Why are we talking
altogether.
about marriage anyway? Right?
It's about equality.
All of
it's equal access.
It's about equality, yes, but equality. Sometimes I think, what are we actually fighting to have here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just happens.
Seth, we're going to have to wrap up, so I want to give you a chance to give a last-minute response, and then we're going to wrap this up. But if you want to continue the conversation to any extent, just call back.
Yeah, call back next week.
I'll call back some other time.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks.
Okay.
See you later, Seth.
Awesome. Thanks.
Also, I just want to pick a fight with someone in chat right now. I was talking about
love it.
when we passed the, civil liberties acts in like the 70s and how that moved people on racism. Maybe didn't necessarily change what racist beliefs they held, but definitely changed the capacity to impose their racism on other people. And Ian McKenna responded, what was it? Let's see. Here we go. Racism is hardly eradicated. Never said racism was eradicated. In fact, I specifically pointed out that there are still systemic racist issues. They responded, I asked him what he was talking about, what they were talking about. I don't know your pronouns. He said, good luck with that. I'm so confused at what you're trying to argue. And then they went on to say we're more racist than ever. I think that's like objectively untrue. Racism still exists. Yes, racism is still a problem. Obviously, maybe somebody needs to call in and educate me, but I don't see how you could possibly argue that we are more racist than ever. That doesn't make any fucking sense to me.
That's a very like not understanding that interracial marriage was banned, slavery existed, like segregation was a real thing. People used to throw rocks at little girls for going to fucking school. All right, like things have changed a little bit. Like, yeah. Oh my god.
Now they're talking about Palestine for their argument, so I'm going to step out of that conversation completely. I genuinely don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Spicy Josie out of me.
Yeah, you're getting the pissed off Arden too. Like, you weren't responding to what I said. You couldn't back up your argument, so you just brought up Palestine out of fucking nowhere. Like, I'm sorry. I'm not interested in having a conversation with you. You are clearly not capable of having a back and forth. You either need to call in or just drop it in chat, because I will banhammer your ass so fast. Or I'll give you a 24-hour cooldown.
Oh my god.
So irritating.
It is so irritating. It's like, it's not even a good faith argument whatsoever. It's like what? Oh my god. You're gonna get me spicy.
All right. We've got 5 pounds from Sean Isherwood. An integer n is less than 1. That's less than 1 is prime if and only if the factorial of n minus 2 is 1 modulo n. Not sure if I've ever done this one before. Sean, you probably could do the same one every other week, and it's so foreign to me that I genuinely probably wouldn't even notice. Like, actually, that would be kind of a funny...
like, I can get, like, a minor in, like, math, because of Sean's, super chats.
Yeah, I know.
It's like just putting the math back in my brain. You know, I used to do like nuclear like equations as, you know, like I used to do that type of stuff, and I don't remember hardly any of them. I can't calculate a neutron life cycle to save my life now.
Neutron life cycle.
Yeah. Neutrons, they have lives and cycles. 5 pounds from Sean, just in case I have done the last one. Here we go. If 2x squared plus y squared equals 5z squared for integers x, y, and z, then x equals y equals z equals 0.
I think you're just making
stuff
shit
it in
up.
My brain, Sean. Stuff it in my brain.
I feel like I genuinely could just start putting numbers and like superscripts and plus signs, and I could come up with anything, and it would be like, to someone like me, it would be like, sure, whatever, I don't know.
The integers thing's what gets me. It's like 5z squared. Don't make me think about this, Sean. Go to the next one.
modulo. I've never heard of modulo as a math term. I don't know what the fuck modulo is. $5 from Skeptoidius. I feel like Joe Biden's views on trans rights I feel like Joe Biden views trans rights much in the same way he views abortion rights, a tool he can use to gain votes. Yeah, I think that's probably a little bit true. It's unfair to, I think, necessarily completely burden him with that, only because every politician is going to be leveraging the issues that they stand for to get votes, right? Like, that's just what being a politician is. But
and I think, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
It's okay. I was just going to say, I'm not convinced that a man of his age range and his faith is likely to, like, sincerely be, like, pro-trans liberation. I think he just probably is more of like I don't want trans people to be discriminated against, and these are what the experts are telling me about trans rights, so I'm just gonna, like, parrot that. I don't know that Joe Biden is, like, sincerely an advocate for trans rights, like, in his own mind, you know what I mean? He's just more, like, relying on his experts and his team. But
And me being a political animal, right, I think about a tool, and a message is a tool. Right. So for me, it's like I don't necessarily think tools is a negative, right? Like, if you are able to use persuasion to be able to say, look, I believe in the woman's, bodily autonomy, a person's bodily autonomy, to be able to get reproductive access to care, and it actually benefits that and actually makes that so. If Biden has this understanding of, like, trans rights in a way that is like, I am going to make the campaign promise and the understanding right now, right here, that if you get me as a president, I'm going to fight for trans rights. For me, I think of a president kind of as a figure of the policies of the party. So for me, it's like, that could be true, but the outcome is the same. Right. It's like we
Sure.
get the same thing both ways. So yeah. I'm very political brain though. So take.
And I totally am on board with, like, I don't need Joe Biden to personally be, like, on trans Twitter, like, learning all the arguments. If he has experts who are informing him of the good facts, and he is, like, advocating for policies based on that, what Joe Biden personally feels about trans issues is irrelevant to me. It's the policies he passes that matter.
Yeah. $5 from Luke Anderson. It is important to broadcast Biden's accomplishments on equality issues. Please go down your list for us, Josie. Which do you think is most impactful? Ooh, putting me on the spot, Luke. Okay. So I think one that is the most impactful is, I'm just going to start with the ACA and gender identity inclusion, of making sure that people are protected with healthcare first and foremost, is probably one of the most important things that happened. But we can continue to go down the list about Title IX, the rule change there, the allowing access of people to join the military, putting more money in research and funding and get data gathering is another very big thing. Actually making the movement of saying to the country, hey, trans visibility, like, let's actually look at that and honor that. The fact that he's talked about trans violence and all of the things about how it's way too high, that the fact that we are still being discriminated for trans people is a complete horrific thing, and we shouldn't continue, just to name a few. And there's a lot more things that are going down the line, but I will say this, and for fair, on balance, let's be on balance, okay? There's one thing he hasn't done, and that is make sure that the VA has removed the exclusion from gender affirming surgeries for veterans that need the care. So in the VA, the Veterans Administration, you cannot get gender affirming surgeries. And that's a problem, and that's not okay, and that needs to go away. And I think that Joe has dragged his feet on that a little bit, but I do feel that it is going to change. And I know it's going to change because I'm working in the rooms with the veterans people, and I know they will change it. It's just politics, and I hate saying that, but it is so. But yes, if you put it on balance with that sucks, but you can't even compare it to Trump. Yeah. Like you can't, like, I don't even want to go down that. I actually wrote an op-ed about it. Maybe I'll put it in the chat. It's on the Advocate. I wrote an op-ed about Biden and Trump.
I'm waiting for people to bust in and complain about how you didn't address bad policies he might have with regard to things outside of equality issues. Because Because I know people just the second they get to shit on Joe Biden, and there's things to shit on him for. Don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah,
they get mad when you don't mention all the right things, and it's like this question was specifically about equality issues, so let's focus on that.
Yeah.
$4.99 from Louise Richardson, selling my place in Galveston and wanting to get involved in the Austin scene again. Oh, that's so cool, Louise.
Nice.
I'm loving Austin. They just opened a this like food truck court kind of close to where I live, with also like this coffee and drinks place. It is so fun. I love Austin. The food here is great. The vibes are impeccable.
I'm gonna visit you soon.
So good.
I gotta go visit you. I know.
You can get talked to about snakes for 30 minutes before we're allowed to do anything, because I'm like, I gotta show everything.
I'm okay with this.
Better be.
Oh, $5 from my favorite other trans reactor operator, Alyssa Nguyen, coming out and removing the stone of shame, transitioning, especially in the face of adversity, is attaching the stone of triumph. GC need to scram.
It's like the
scram.
Stone, is that like
means shutting down the reactor
thing? Oh,
yes,
okay.
Yes, yeah. But a scram is like shutting down the reactor, which I always love to actually say the acronym, which is Super Critical Reactor Axeman, which is also very gendered, where there literally used to be a person with a that had an axe and a rope that was connected to the to the rods that would go in and shut down the reactor, and literally that's how they would do an emergency shut off. A man would have an axe and swing it and cut the rope, which would drop the thing off a pulley and shut down the reactor.
Huh.
That's so where it comes from. And we still call it a scram.
That's really interesting. I also know Matt always talks about how, in all the movies, people will be like, the reactor's going critical. And he's like, it's always critical. It's super critical is the problem. Or something like that. I'm like...
It's true. It's true. That's the truth. If it's critical, means it's doing what it's supposed to do.
Right. $5 from Skip Toitius. Arden, how are the hatchlings doing? I'm waiting impatiently. LOL. Me want snicky. Me want snickity. Me want snickety snack. They're doing great. Actually, the bananas are spicy. I got bit by the bananas in their first week out of the incubator. So they'll calm down. I think they just are ready to eat. So they're being a little spicy, but they're so cute. They're beautiful.
Eating? They're going to eat your fingers? I think there's something better you could feed them.
No, they're just, they're snappy. A lot of baby snakes are snappy, but most of ours haven't been too bad, but these ones have been very, very snappy. Also, I gotta pee like crazy, so I'm going to send up the next super chat, and I'm going to run to the bathroom.
All right, vamping now. All right, $10 from Scriptodius. If trans people have such an unfair advantage in sports, then why is it every time as a trans person competes, they do worse than what they did before they transition? That's absolutely true. We already see the science. There is no one, as far as I know of, that after, even at the professional level, will perform better or at the same level of when they transitioned. I know there was a professional long distance bike rider who was top of their form, male athlete, and then transitioned, and her times dramatically dropped to that of a high performing woman athlete. So it was actually pretty interesting. But yeah, it's we can just use our eyeballs. The fact that Leah Thomas, right? They talk about Leah Thomas a lot, is how Leah Thomas, they say, oh, she was a top performing male, or she got 89th place on male division or whatever, when in reality Leah Thomas was actually in the top 10 men performers in her division before she transitioned. And then because of the rules, she still had to perform in the male division for a year on hormones, and that's why she was 89th place in the male performing category. So then after she actually competed in sports, she was still at the level of like top performer in the women category, but still not the best. And there's a lot of misinformation out there that made it seem like, oh, Leah Thomas was like 89th place in the male or 890th place in the male division, but that was after a year of hormones versus when she was 8th place in the men's division before hormones. So yeah, it's all BS. But no, thank you for your comments, Skip.
Sweet. I had to pee for like an hour, but I was like, please just get to the end of the show. You can make it. You can make it. And I was literally just about to pee my pants. So I was like,
that's why you were rushing those calls.
I gotta
That's
go.
why you're rushing those calls.
$10 from Larry Fishman. Yesterday, my psychologist and I agreed that I should start working towards getting bottom surgery as soon as possible rather than waiting a few years. I'm already talking with my insurance company. That's awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah.
It's definitely an overwhelming process. Yeah. I'm really committed to going to the Supporn Clinic in Thailand just because their method is different. You can't find anyone who performs that method in the US. So it's such unfortunate that insurance won't cover it. But yeah, I'm really happy for you and definitely excited that you get to get that process moving because the wait is so frustrating.
It is so frustrating, and just to say that, it's like these waits are like a year, 2 years long. So like the idea that people can just go in and get a surgery really quickly is so bullshit. Like it's like it takes this long. Like, you know, like when I got mine, like I wasn't sure I wanted bottom surgery, but I did a consult because the consult was years ahead of time. So I was I'll get one just in case I changed my mind, and luckily I did. So I was like, all right, great.
Oh, I can't wait. It's still probably going to be like 2 years.
We'll talk later, Aaron.
Okay. $10 from Razor Sharp. Wait, is this me or did I read the last one? I read the last one.
Okay. $10 from Razor Sharp. Have y'all ever discussed the projection of conservatives with the groomer narrative? Oh, I have.
Oh, yeah. There's actually like a whole repository of links from Sock Done Left on Twitter, I think. Who it's like the pedocon theory, right? Where like every accusation is an admission, and it's like just a bunch of lists of politicians and like officials who have made some sort of statement and then their accusations against them. There's something like that is out there somewhere. It might not be Sock Done Left, it might be someone else, but there's an account on Twitter who's in like the left-leaning space who's like compiled a bunch of these.
Yeah.
$5 from Alyssa Nguyen. Josie, quick, what's the 6-factor formula? Hashtag hot rock make steam, make turbine go roundy roundy.
No, I don't know, and I'm proud I don't know anymore.
Keep that shit out of my brain.
Yeah. $5 from Stephanie Helms. I've been talking to my fellow members of the U.S. Sailing Transgender Policy Task Force and other officials since the World Sailing Policy was announced. Yay, Stephanie! So good to see you.
Yeah, I heard that World Sailing announced that they're banning trans women's participation from women's sailing, which is just like, it's really getting absurd. Like,
it is.
Like, apparently, it's like pool, darts, and chess and sailing we all have an advantage on. I would really like to see the facts with regard to that. Also, it's interesting. I saw someone with regard to curling talk about like, oh, well, men have an advantage because here's the study where it shows that they can rush the ground faster and harder because they're stronger, right? But what they didn't realize is that further down the paper, it talks about how while men can brush harder and that can make the curling rock move further, on average, because they're exerting more energy, their performance drops intensely over the course of a game, whereas women are more stable in their performance, and so their scores actually average out. And it's like, just because you can identify a difference between like average male and average female performance doesn't necessarily mean that it is an advantage. You know what I mean? Like, it just, there's so many layers of absurdity. God.
It's the same thing with the puberty graph too, right? Like with the puberty blockers, it's like, oh my gosh, puberty blockers stunt IQ. But what it actually does is the fact that when you're on puberty blockers, it slows it down and makes the curve more gradual. But both curves end at the same point as far as IQ average. It's like you're not being realistic to the actual data set. You're just cherry picking. But Stephanie, I hope that the U.S. sailing gets their head out of their ass.
$5 from Stephanie Helms, including U.S. sailing's president. There's a lot going on. Well, good. I'm glad you're there with them. Hopefully to influence in a positive way.
Yeah. $4.99 from Louise Richardson. Josie, you may know my cousin's representative, Donna Howard. Are they in Maryland? I don't know. I don't know Donna Howard. Now I'm gonna look them up. I don't know.
I think I had a teacher named Donna Howard in elementary school.
Yeah. It's a pretty common name.
Yeah.
I do not know Donna Howard. They are a Texas representative.
Oh, okay.
Do not. Yeah. But good asking. I might.
I don't think I even heard of her. $5 from Melissa Nguyen. Remove the Stone of Shame. Attach the Stone of Triumph is from The Simpsons, Season 6, Episode 12. Homer joins a secret society called the Stonecutters. Oh, okay.
I should have known that. I love that episode. I was such a Simpson nerd when I was a kid. Oh my god. It's so funny. Stonecutters. I love them.
All right, so that is the last super chat. Thank you, everybody, for showing up to the show. And thank you to the callers. We had even the caller who I was most worried about. All the calls I thought were as good as they could go. Like, so pretty happy with that. Thank you, guys. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I like people who are actually coming in with a little bit of an edge and are there trying to like just really get to know a trans person. And I think some of the callers never talked to a trans person before. And I think that is very enlightening. And also the fact that, although we are online on this show, like for me in particular, I don't live online. I actually touch grass for a living. And because of that, I think that it does bring a nice breath of fresh air into a lot of these conversations as well. But no, I'm always happy to be here, and I'm going to be here next week.
Yeah, I think it's also a lot easier to be a troll or antagonistic, like through chat and stuff. And the second you start talking to real people, you're like, oh shit, they're actually real people who have arguments and values. Oh no, I can't. They're not the boogeyman anymore. Like they melt away. But yeah, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Jess, for call screening. I really appreciate it. You did a great job today. Thank you to the mods. And to everyone who's in the chat, thank you guys for watching. We will be back with myself and Josie again next week because we're just kind of the best. And really, what more could you ask for?
I know, right? And who also are the best are these people that are coming up on the screen. You should be one of these people. These are who the cool people are. I know you're in chat, but you could be even cooler. Think about that.
Yeah. Patreon.com/calltheline. Check it out.
Call the line.